I had a dream, and then I turn on the lights and she's dead on the floor.
How?
I have blood all over me, and there's a bloody knife on the bed, and I think I did it.
At around 1 a.m. on September 1st, 2017, a 911 dispatcher from Raleigh Police Department received a call from 28-year-old Matthew Phelps, who sounded a bit sedated. During the call, he claimed that he had accidentally stabbed his wife Lauren to death while he was dreaming. He then suddenly woke up and saw his wife lying in a pool of blood on the floor.
I took more medicine than I should have.
What medicine did you take?
I took course eating, cough and cold, because I know it can make you feel good, so a lot of times I can't sleep at night.
Is she breathing at all? Is her chest moving? Is anything going on with her?
No.
Okay, well, we're gonna at least...
The blood is dried on me.
It's dried?
The blood's not wet on me. The blood is dry.
Not long after this portion of the phone call, Matthew admits to why he's acting so strangely and presents a reason for the slaying. Raleigh police arrived at Matthew's Patuxent Drive home in Raleigh just seconds after the 7-minute call. Matthew's wife, 29-year-old Lauren, was lying motionless on the floor. A blood-soaked knife was on the bed, and the cough medicine was laid out on the bathroom counter, supporting his claim for taking cough medicine. Though Lauren exhibited no signs of life, paramedics still took her to the hospital where she was pronounced dead. Detectives were confused about whether it was a tragic accident or a planned murder, but they brought Matthew in for further questioning. The results of the autopsy performed on Lauren's corpse revealed gruesome details. Her body suffered 123 stab wounds. 44 of those were around her face, and the rest were on her head, neck, and arms. Although there was no doubt about who was responsible for Lauren's death, detectives were torn between the theory of her demise being a tragic accident or a planned murder. Hundreds of pictures on their social media accounts represented the couple's contented life together. Matthew did not have any criminal record. From the outside, they were a happy-go-lucky couple who had it all. The cough syrup theory could not be immediately discounted. After all, cough syrups, when taken in a high dosage, can cause euphoria, delusions, and dissociative phenomena which often result in people acting strangely. In order to solve the mystery of this killing, investigators began to dive deep into the couple's history. Lauren Ashley Nicole Hugelmeyer was born on June 9, 1988 in Los Angeles County. In a tight-knit and religious family, Lauren had a picture-perfect childhood along with her two siblings, older sister Beth and younger sister Brianna. Lauren was known as an all-around happy person. She was known to be hardworking and studious. In 2007, Lauren graduated from Swain County High School in North Carolina. Afterward, she graduated college with a degree in Business Administration and Management in 2011 from Appalachian State University. After completing her studies, she worked as an auditor at Quintiles. She also started her own business selling Scentsy products.
I have a pre-order list I can sell 5 of these starting today. So today until the 31st, I have a special offer for 5 people if you want in on one of these.
She was very passionate about Scentsy, and her Facebook page was filled with photos and videos about her side business, including trips she took with others who sell the Scentsy products. Aside from that, Lauren was also an active member of Hope Lutheran Church and worked as a Sunday school teacher as part of her work with the church's children's and youth ministries. In her mid-20s, Lauren reconnected with one of her old classmates from middle school, Matthew Phelps. The two lost touch in high school since Matthew transferred and Lauren's family eventually moved to Raleigh, North Carolina. While Lauren grew up in a loving home, Matthew had not been so fortunate. Matthew did not have any close bonds with his family. He was primarily raised by his grandparents because his parents neglected their responsibilities. His parents separated after his birth. While his biological father was entirely absent from his life, his mother was also rarely around. His mother remarried a few times, but Matthew never formed a father and son type bond with any of his stepfathers. His grandparents tried their best to provide him with love and care, but there was not enough to fill the vacant place in his heart. This dynamic may have been what caused him to start acting out from an early age. Whether his living conditions affected his mind or not, Matthew started hanging out with the wrong crowd and began abusing drugs and alcohol in his high school years. Matthew and his friends were known to have often consumed quercetin, the same medicine that he was now claiming to have taken before attacking his wife. High amounts of quercetin cause a high, which Matthew and his friends took advantage of. This addiction began to spiral out of control, and as a result, Matthew's grandparents were eventually forced to take Matthew out of public high school and put him in a private Christian academy to try to get his life back on the right track. This worked well for Matthew. He started getting better grades in school and eventually graduated. He then attended the Clear Creek Baptist Bible College in Pineville, Kentucky, and seemed to have significantly improved from his early high school years to eventually graduating college in 2011. It was Matthew who stumbled upon Lauren's photos and realized that they both knew each other. After hesitating for a bit, Matthew reached out to Lauren through Instagram. He liked every picture of Lauren that was ever posted. The two began catching up, and as such things often go, the texts soon transitioned to long, late-night phone calls. Before long, both Matthew and Lauren fell head over heels for each other. The two began a long-distance relationship since Matthew was still living in Kentucky at the time. Despite living hundreds of miles away from each other, the relationship between them began to progress very quickly. It did not take long before Matthew made the effort to visit Lauren in Raleigh. Eventually, he moved back to North Carolina to be with her. Being so close to her family, Lauren was excited to introduce Matthew to everyone. Most of her family welcomed Matthew with open arms, trusting Lauren's choices. They saw him as a kind and well-behaved man who genuinely cared for their daughter. Lauren's mother, Lori, thought him to be the perfect fit for her daughter. However, Lauren's father, Dale, was skeptical about the relationship. Perhaps it was just a father's protectiveness for his daughter, or maybe a gut feeling. But as far as Dale was concerned, Matthew was moving way too fast and possibly hiding secrets from Lauren. Yet he could not put his finger on what exactly it was about Matthew that gave him that uneasiness. He decided to set his feelings aside because his daughter seemed so happy. In time, Matthew became part of the family. Dale's suspicions were finally taking shape when Matthew dropped a bombshell at the dinner table during a visit to Lauren's parents' house for a game night. He confessed to having a failed marriage prior to dating Lauren, but refused to share any other details. This raised questions about his integrity and intention, as not only had he already been divorced at such a young age, but also he hid the fact for months into his new relationship. And more than words, it was his body language that looked sketchy to Lauren's family. Nevertheless, Lauren loved him with all her heart and didn't seem to mind any of his actions, so the family offered their support when they progressed to the next step in their relationship. The couple finally got engaged in 2015. The engagement party was remembered as one of a kind by her family and friends. Matthew's mother, whom the family described as problematic, did not really like Lauren. She even went to the point of purposefully wearing a white dress to the wedding to make her feelings known. However, the event went off without a hitch, and the couple tied the knot the following year. The pair incorporated the Star Wars theme in their wedding since they were both huge fans of the franchise. Both Lauren and Matthew seemed to be on top of the world as they started their new journey together. For Lauren, married life was a dream come true. She had her own house, a job that she put all of her efforts into, and a husband who always knew how to make her smile. However, the dream marriage soon began to transform into an ugly reality as Matthew began to show his true colors just a few months into their marriage. Matthew was having a hard time finding jobs, and when he did find a job, he'd soon leave the job with little to no explanation. In addition to that, he idly spent most of his time playing video games while Lauren had to work multiple jobs to run the household. According to Lauren's family, whom she often confided in, this put a strain on their finances. But that wasn't the only factor putting financial strain on Lauren. Matthew was overspending on fancy electronic gadgets and gaming equipment, while Lauren was focusing on tightening their purse strings. He spent $1,200 on iTunes and Xbox subscriptions for his video gaming. He'd even go to the extent of stealing money out of Lauren's purse if she ever refused to pay for his frivolous lifestyle. Lauren had approximately $10,000 in her bank account before getting married to Matthew, but by the time of her death, it had dwindled to only $1,000. There were other problems in the relationship besides just Matthew's spending habits. While visiting Matthew's family home with them 6 months after the couple got married, not only did his mother give Lauren the cold shoulder, but she and Matthew fought the whole time. She felt like an outcast in their home. Naturally, the reasons behind most of the fights were in regard to Matthew's money-spending habits, which prevented them from pursuing things they wanted to do together. As mentioned earlier, the couple was a big fan of Star Wars, and they were trying to save money for a trip to Disney World. However, Matthew would spend whatever little was saved on his own selfish habits, never allowing the couple to get ahead. Additionally, Lauren was suspicious that Matthew had had an extramarital affair with their neighbor, whom Matthew regularly spent time with. There was an instance when Lauren was on the phone with her elder sister Beth while cooking dinner for Matthew. After coming back from work, he went out to hang out with the neighbor and left a text for Lauren stating that he was having way too much fun with the neighbor and that Lauren should have dinner without him. Although Matthew spent a lot of time with their neighbor, he was extremely possessive of Lauren. There were multiple fights regarding a man at their church who, Matthew thought, was hitting on Lauren. Matthew distrusted Lauren, which caused even more distance between them. Matthew justified his insecurities by recounting the story of how his ex-wife left him after meeting another man on a missionary trip. For obvious reasons, his justifications would not solve anything, as their relationship was on a downward spiral. Lauren had opened up to loved ones on multiple occasions about her desire to leave her controlling husband less than a year into their marriage. However, because of her religious beliefs, she was adamant about making the marriage work and tried to push divorce to the back of her mind as a last resort. Despite all of their issues, Lauren still tried to present a perfect marriage to the outside world. On every platform of social media, she continued to post pictures and videos of themselves accompanied by sugary sweet captions expressing their love. Yet that was in stark contrast to what was actually happening behind closed doors. Eventually, Matthew decided to go back to college to become a pastor for their church in an attempt to keep their marriage afloat. However, Lauren was not significantly impressed with this effort. In fact, fed up with his inconsiderate and immature behavior, Lauren was finally on the verge of leaving Matthew, but she would never have the chance to follow through with that decision. Instead, she was brutally murdered by her husband in their marital bed. With all this history, it did not take long to put the puzzle pieces together. They all concurred that everything about the crime scene looked way too staged. Not only were the knife and the cough syrup perfectly set out in certain positions, but Matthew had almost no blood on him aside from some on his shoes and a few drops on his shirt. This was not consistent with someone who had stabbed a person 123 times. It looked as though Matthew had attempted to clean himself up, which contradicts his claims of being in a delusional state. Luminol tests performed around their apartment showed that there were traces of blood everywhere, which had been cleaned up before authorities could see it. Investigators now recalled how Matthew would show no emotions when they arrived at the crime scene. Subsequently, Bayer, the maker of quercetin, released a statement saying that there was no evidence to suggest that quercetin is associated with violent behavior. Additionally, a medical report suggested that, at the time of the murder, his body contained a very low amount of the drug, and it was unlikely to have impacted his reasoning at all. However, Matthew opted to stick to his alibi about the cough syrup and did not change his story. So, investigators started digging deeper for more evidence. Upon delving further into Matthew's motives, the investigators found a journal where he wrote about all the troubles he was having with Lauren. He went on and on about his low esteem and insecurities in his relationship with Lauren. Despite Lauren's best efforts, Matthew never felt he fit in well with her family. The neighbor with whom Lauren had suspected Matthew of having an affair with told police that they were just friends and bonded over their struggles with anxiety and depression. She also shared that as they continued spending time together, Matthew began talking about more morbid subjects such as suicide and death. Perhaps he intended to get his hands on the licensed and concealed gun he knew she had in her home. Additionally, after gaining access to his phone, investigators discovered his concerning search history. He had searched for odd things, such as, "How loopy does quercetin make you?" or "Have other people been high from quercetin?" Looking solely at these Google searches, one could surmise that this murder was premeditated and he was already planning on using the cough medicine as a defense. However, this circumstantial evidence was not enough to build a solid case against him. Yet soon another discovery came to light. Matthew had a secret Instagram account, @Marty_radical, where he posted dark images from the movie American Psycho and pictures of him dressed as Patrick Bateman, the lead character of the movie. Apparently, Matthew was obsessed with serial killers and expressed to a friend that he was curious about what it would feel like to kill someone. Right before he murdered Lauren, he posted an Instagram photo with a caption saying, "Everyone thinks I'm a serial killer. #FoundAnAngelToKill." The account contained numerous posts that discussed the devil and demons. Finally, it was time to bring the matter to trial. Prosecutors were confident that they had enough evidence to implicate Matthew in his wife's intentional murder. However, Matthew's defense argued in court that this wasn't in Matthew's character and that he was in an unstable and depressed mental state when the murder occurred. To support the claim, they presented a few letters from Matt's co-workers to the judge, insisting that this was not in Matthew's character. The prosecution brought Matthew's ex-wife to the stand. Contradicting Matthew's previous claims of her cheating on him, she revealed that it was Matthew who cheated on her multiple times throughout their marriage. Like Lauren, she seemed to have similar issues in her marriage to Matthew. These included Matthew not working, spending way too much money, and not contributing anything to their dreams together, which ended up causing the separation. Matthew ultimately accepted a plea deal and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder to avoid the death penalty he was initially facing.
You're pleading guilty to one offense. That's the offense of first-degree murder. It is a felony. It carries the maximum penalty of death or life without the possibility of parole. Do you understand that?
Yes, sir.
Do you personally plead guilty to the charge I just described?
Yes, sir.
And did you in fact murder your wife, Lauren Hugelmeyer Phelps, by stabbing her multiple times?
Yes, sir.
The matter finally came to a conclusion on October 5, 2018, when Matthew was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After sentencing, Matthew read an apology to Lauren's family.
I'm sorry that I took away Lauren's life, a life that was deeply connected to so many people.
However, his apology fell on deaf ears, as her family said that it meant nothing to them.
Never. I'll take him to my grave, and I'll still hate him. There's no way. No man can do that to any human being.
They stated that they could never forgive him for his thoughtless actions. They shared in a statement, "He was luring all of us into a trap by taking advantage of our kindness and generosity. We never once thought Lauren was in danger." To this day, Lauren's family feels a sense of blame for not intervening when they knew the relationship had taken a turn for the worse. To help others like their beloved Lauren, they have put together an organization called Lauren's Light, which raises awareness for abusive relationships and domestic violence. Aarushi Talwar was born on the 24th of May, 1994, to her loving parents, Dr. Rajesh and Dr. Nupur Talwar. Both parents were dentists who practiced at a clinic they shared with another dentist couple, as well as the Fortis Hospital, where Rajesh was the head of the dental department. Additionally, Dr. Rajesh also taught at the ITS College of Dentistry. All those who knew Aarushi described her as a kind, pretty girl who had many friends and was always happy and carefree. She was known to be a huge fan of the Bollywood star Shah Rukh Khan. When she saw him in a commercial, she would say to her friends, "I wish I could jump into the TV and marry him right now." She was shy, but she did have one secret desire that she confided in friends. "I want to become famous." She was a student at the Delhi Public School and was well loved by her friends in school who had nothing bad to say about her. At home too, as the only child of the dentist couple, she was doted on by her parents. The Talwars seemed to be the perfect representation of a happy, loving family. Living along with them in their apartment in Sector 25 of Noida was Yam Prasad Banjadi, better known as Hemraj, who was the live-in domestic help and cook for the Talwars. He was not Indian, but came from Nepal and belonged to the Darapani village in the Argakanchi district. Everything seemed to be perfect in the life of Aarushi and the Talwars. She was happy, doing well in school, and had many friends who loved her. Her parents' business was successful and the family was fairly well off. It all seemed too good to be true. And it turns out, it was. On the night of May 15th, 2008, less than 10 days before Arushi's 14th birthday, a heart-wrenching tragedy struck the Talwar household, and it would never be the same again.
A 14-year-old girl, Aarushi Talwar, was murdered in the home of her parents, her throat slit.
May 15th, 2008 was a normal day in the Talwar household by all accounts. Rajesh taught at the ITS Dental College from 8:45 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. before treating patients at his clinic till 8:30 p.m. Nupur treated patients at the clinic from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. and then picked Aarushi up from school at 1:30 p.m. and returned home to their apartment with her. They then were joined for lunch by Nupur's sister-in-law, Vandana, the wife of Rajesh's brother, Dinesh. Nupur and Vandana left after lunch, while Aarushi remained at home. Nupur worked at Fortis Hospital from 4:30 to 7 p.m. before returning to the apartment around 7:30 p.m. Rajesh arrived home soon after, around 9:30 p.m., and was dropped off by his driver, Umesh Sharma. When Umesh came to the apartment at 9:40 p.m. after parking the car nearby to hand over Rajesh's bag and the keys of the car to Hemraj, he saw Nupur and Aarushi at the dining table and Rajesh coming out of his room. He was the last person outside the home to see Aarushi alive. After eating dinner, which Hemraj had prepared for the family, the Talwars stated that they went to Arushi's room, where they gave her Sony DSC W130 digital camera as an early birthday present.
And the courier had come in the morning. We ordered a camera for her. Rajesh said, no, let's give it to her on the 24th. And I said, de dete hain. It's her birthday party, 3 days, she can take pictures.
The camera had arrived by courier earlier that day, and despite Rajesh wanting to wait for Arushi's birthday to give it to her, he was persuaded by Nupur to present it to her that night as an early birthday surprise. Aarushi took several photographs of herself and her parents, the last one being recorded at 10:10 p.m. Afterward, her parents retired to their room for the night, while Aarushi remained in her own room. Around 11 p.m., Rajesh asked Nupur to go turn on the Wi-Fi, and because the router was in Arushi's room, she had to enter it again. According to Nupur, when she did, Aarushi was fine and was reading Chetan Bhagat's The 3 Mistakes of My Life. Nupur says she returned to her own room after switching off the router. Around this time, Rajesh answered a call on the landline which indicated the ringer was on. He then surfed some dentistry sites and his stock portfolio until 11:41 p.m., which was the last time his laptop showed internet usage. However, the last use of the internet router was at 12:08 a.m. At around midnight, Anmal, a friend of Arushi's, called her cell phone. When she didn't answer, he tried the house's landline, but again there was no answer, which was strange as Rajesh had used it only an hour ago when he answered his call. He then sent her a text message at around 12:30 a.m., but this never reached her phone. The exact events after this time remain unclear, and investigators are still unsure as to what exactly happened between 12 and 6 a.m. in the Talwar household. However, the events of the next morning have been very well documented. On the morning of May 16, 2008, the family's housemaid, Bharathi Mandal, rang the doorbell of the apartment at around 6 a.m. She had only been employed by the family for about 6 days, and usually Hemraj would open the door for her in the morning, as Nupur and Rajesh tended to sleep in a bit longer. However, this morning, no one opened the door, even when she rang the bell twice. Confused, she tried to push on the outermost door as it sometimes jammed shut, but it did not budge. When she rang the bell a third time, Nupur opened the innermost door. She then told Bharathi that the middle grill door was locked from the outside and explained that Hemraj had probably locked it from the outside when he went to purchase milk for the morning. She initially asked Barathi to wait outside until Hemraj returned, but Barathi did not want to wait, so she said she'd go downstairs so Nupur could throw her the keys for the gate from the balcony. Nupur then called Hemraj's phone to see where he was, but the call was cut off. When she tried to call him again, his phone appeared to be switched off. In this time, Barathi had gone downstairs, and Nupur called out for her to check if the door was only latched, not locked. But Barathi insisted she throw down the keys anyways, so she'd not have to take the stairs again, and Nupur did so. While this was happening, Rajesh too had awoken and left the bedroom. When he entered the living room, he saw a nearly empty whiskey bottle on the dining room table with bloodstains on it, which worried him. He asked Nupur who had left the bottle there, and when she did not know, in a state of panic, he asked her to check Aarushi's room. The door of Aarushi's room was self-locking and could only be opened from the outside with a key when shut. But that morning, the door was left slightly ajar and unlocked. When they entered, what they saw left them shocked to their cores. Aarushi was lying on her bed with her throat slit. There was blood on the bed, walls, and floor. Her body had been covered with a white flannel blanket, and a school bag had been placed over her face to cover the injuries on it. Rajesh started screaming in panic, while Nupur remained quiet, in stunned silence out of the pure shock at what she was seeing. Meanwhile, Bharati returned to the outermost gate. She pushed it, and it opened without the key. She found that the middle door was latched, but not locked. She opened the latch and walked in. On entering the apartment, she saw that both Rajesh and Nupur were in tears. Rajesh loudly accused the missing Hemraj in front of her, exclaiming, "See what Hemraj has done." She was then shown Arushi's body and room by Nupur, but did not enter it. Unsure of what to do and how to console the grieving parents, she rushed out of the house and informed the neighbors as to what had happened. The Talwars, too, called their family and friends to tell them of the tragedy that had befallen them. In all of this, the police were not informed until Punish Ray Tandon, a neighbor who lived one floor below the Talwars, asked the apartment security guard, Virendra Singh, to inform the police. The UP State Police arrived at the house by 6:50 a.m. on the morning of May 16th, but by the time they'd arrived, the crime scene was in absolute chaos. Neighbors, close friends, and relatives had all arrived, having been called by the Talwars who told them of the murder. Over 20 people were present in the living area and the Talwars' bedroom. They had completely trampled upon the crime scene, destroying any and all traces of evidence that the police could have used in their investigation. Only Arushi's bedroom had been left vacant, and this is where the most evidence would be recovered from. The two officers who led the investigation that day were Investigating Officer Dadaram Nonaria and Superintendent of Police Mahesh Mishra. However, the state police made a crucial mistake. They failed to cordon off the crime scene and did not ask all of the additional people to leave immediately. Many people were still roaming in the apartment freely. Additionally, around 8 a.m., a large number of reporters and media persons arrived at the apartment, having heard about the murder that had taken place in the affluent neighborhood. In a shocking display of negligence, the police failed to keep even the media off the property, and they too were present in the apartment when the forensic team later arrived. According to the CBI team, 90% of the evidence at the crime scene was destroyed due to the state police's failure to follow proper procedure in securing it. The fact that this case remains unsolved even today can, in some part, be blamed on these actions. Arushi's room was where the forensic team was able to gather the most evidence, as this room had not been disturbed by the outsiders and press as much as the rest of the house. Arushi's body was found lying on the bed, covered with a white flannel blanket, and her own school bag had been used to cover her face. There was blood found on her pillow, the bed, the walls, the floor, and the bedroom door. However, no blood was found on the stuffed toys, the school bag, or the pink pillow that were all on her bed. All these items lay within range of the blood splatter area, but had no bloodstains on them, indicating they were placed on the bed after her murder, probably by her killer. Her bed sheet was laid out smoothly, showing no signs of struggle. A circular watermark was found below her pelvic area on the sheet, but her visibly untied pajamas did not have any such wet patch. This indicates that the pajamas were likely pulled up after her body was wiped clean. As the forensics team scoured the house for any possible evidence, the police collected statements from the parents as well as some of the other individuals present in the house. In his statement, Rajesh adamantly blamed Hemraj for the murder. He even went so far as to tell the police to stop wasting time in the apartment and offered them 25,000 rupees to rush to Hemraj's native village in Nepal. From his statement, and due to Hemraj being missing, the police believe that it was an open and shut case, as a senior officer at the team told the Talwars. Their theory at the time was that he'd consumed the whiskey from the bottle on the table and then, in a drunken state, had tried to enter Aarushi's room to assault her. When she resisted, he hit her with the blunt edge of his kukri, a traditional Nepali knife, before cutting her throat and escaping. The police announced a 20,000 rupee reward for anyone with useful information that could lead to Hemraj's capture. At around 8:30 a.m., Aarushi's body was taken for an autopsy to see if any other evidence could be found. A part of Aarushi's bloodstained mattress was cut out and sent to the forensics lab, along with her pillow, bedsheet, and clothes. Vikas Sethi, a pharmacist who worked with the Talwars, later stated that he, along with 3 other individuals, had wanted to dump the remaining part of the mattress on the terrace, but found it locked. When they asked Rajesh for the key to the terrace, he disappeared for a long time and then later told them he could not find the key. As they did not want to break down the door, the men threw the mattress on the neighboring terrace. Aarushi's body returned home at 1 p.m. on May 16th. The body was brought home and laid on ice slabs in the living room. It was taken for cremation at 4 p.m. on the same day after the police confirmed that the body was not needed for any further examination. According to the Talwars, who were later accused of being in a hurry to cremate the body, it was decomposing fast, and the family elders were pushing for cremation. The police later also said that the Talwar staff were very hasty in cleaning Aarushi's room. In the Talwars' defense, their pharmacist, Vikas Sethi, told the court that he had received permission to clean the house from the police personnel and a lady constable present at the crime scene. According to the CBI, when the post-mortem report was being written, between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. on May 16th, a series of telephone conversations took place between Dinesh Talwar, Dr. Sushil Chowdhury, Dinesh's friend and the chairman of the Eye Care Eye Hospital, and K.K. Gautam, retired deputy superintendent of police. K.K. Gautam, while deposing at the CBI court later in 2012, stated that Chowdhury had requested that he get any references to a sexual assault removed from the post-mortem report, but he refused to oblige. At the end of the day on May 16th, the police were sure that Hemraj was the murderer and believed that if they found him, they would have their man. They therefore neglected to look deeper into certain matters that they should have examined more closely. The next day, on May 17th, the Talwars left for Haridwar to immerse Aarushi's ashes in the Ganges River as per the Hindu custom. While they were gone, visitors continued to pour into their household, which was being managed by Dinesh, to offer their condolences. One of these visitors was retired police officer K.K. Gautam, who had been asked by one of the couple's friends to come to the house. When he arrived at the house, Gautam examined the rooms of Aarushi and Hemraj. He was then shown the bloodstains on the terrace door handle by Dinesh. Dinesh asked him if he could get the terrace door unlocked. Gautam then called SP, Superintendent of Police, Mahesh Mishra, who was in charge of the investigation, and told him that the lock needed to be broken. Mishra promised that he'd pay a visit to the crime scene himself, and in the meantime, sent the station officer, Dadaram Nonaria, to the apartment. The key to the terrace was still missing. In the end, Dadaram Nonaria broke the lock, and the group went onto the terrace for the first time since the murder. The first thing they saw were the bloody track marks, as if a body had been dragged across the terrace. Then, to their horror, they saw a body lying in a pool of blood. It had been there for so long that it was no longer recognizable in its advanced stage of decomposition. They also found a smudged bloody handprint on the wall of the terrace and a bloody footprint from a size 8 or 9 shoe. A double bed cover had been draped across the iron grill that separated the Talwar's terrace from the neighboring terrace, where Aarushi's mattress had been dumped the previous day. Dinesh Talwar couldn't identify the body, so he called Rajesh and Nupur, who were on their way to Haridwar, and asked them to come home. When the couple returned to the home, Newport didn't enter the house. Instead, she sat in the car with Aarushi's ashes, as she considered it inauspicious to take the ashes inside. Rajesh was the one who went upstairs to identify the body. He told the police that he couldn't be sure that the body was that of hemorrhage due to the injuries and the decomposition. Rajesh and Newport then resumed their journey to Haridwar to immerse their daughter's ashes. Later, a friend of Hemraj identified the body as his. An autopsy of Hemraj's body was conducted that night by Dr. Naresh Raj. Not much information is available about Hemraj himself, except that he was from the Darapani village in the Agarakanchi district of Nepal and had been recommended to the Talwars by a friend of his. He regularly sent back money to his family in Nepal from his earnings. The discovery of Hemraj's body greatly embarrassed the police, as they had initially focused their attention solely on him as the murderer. The police were also criticized for other investigative blunders, such as not cordoning off the crime scene. The investigating officer, Dadaram Nonaria, was transferred on May 17th. The next day, Superintendent of Police Mahesh Mishra was also transferred. After this, the angle of the investigation drastically changed. The autopsies conducted on both Aarushi and Hemraj presented police with new evidence which they could use to form theories as a part of their investigations. The autopsy on Aarushi found that the cause of death for her was not the slitting of the throat, but rather the blow to her head by a blunt object that had killed her before her throat was cut. The blunt injury was on Arushi's forehead above the left eye. The blow caused a deep cut, around 1.5 inches by 1 inch, and a blood clot about 3 inches by 3/4 of an inch in her brain. The incision on Arushi's neck measured 5.5 inches by 2.25 inches. Her blood drained from the neck wounds, but there was no arterial spurting, which indicated that these wounds were inflicted on her after the blunt injuries had already stopped her heart. The 2008 post-mortem report of Aarushi was written by Dr. Sunil Door. In it, he said that Arushi's genital area had nothing abnormal detected, thus sexual assault was ruled out as a possibility. But at the same time, he also noted the presence of a whitish discharge at her vagina. The sample was sent for examination at the local district hospital, which reported an absence of CBI. However, when this vaginal swab sample was sent to CBI's forensic labs, it was suspected to have been tampered with. In a shocking discovery, it was discovered later that Arushi's vaginal swabs that were sent to be tested at the Center for DNA, Fingerprinting and Diagnostics in Hyderabad did not match her blood samples, which basically meant that the swabs did not belong to her. The CBI conducted a raid on the Noida District Hospital, only to find that Arushi's original medical file, her pathology reports, and autopsy findings were all missing, thus ensuring that vital clues that could have led to the murderer or murderers were lost forever. The CBI could not establish whether the sample was switched in the hospital or at the police station. Later, in 2012, Dr. Door gave a different statement, saying that Arushi's privates were extraordinarily dilated, although they showed no signs of sexual assault. He also stated that her vaginal orifice was unduly large. The mouth of her cervix was visible, and the whitish discharge was only in the vagina, where it should have spread to the entire area. He said he did not mention these observations in his original report because they were subjective findings, and because the findings were non-specific and were very strange. He added that the wide vaginal opening could only have formed if someone manipulated it while the rigor mortis was setting in. He therefore concluded that Arushi's private parts appeared to have been cleaned after she died. These findings, along with the alleged tampering of the samples, would appear as if someone wanted to erase evidence that could have pointed towards sexual assault. Unfortunately, the police were never able to determine whether this evidence was, in fact, legitimate or who had tampered with the samples. Hemraj's body provided much less evidence upon autopsy, mainly due to the state of decomposition. His body had been found almost 2 days after he'd been killed. However, from an analysis of the terrace and the rest of the apartment, police were able to determine that his blood was only present on the terrace. This indicated that he had been killed there. But even with that, The drag marks on the terrace were consistent with what would have been made by a body being dragged on a bedsheet, so again, the police could not be sure of this. Unlike Aarushi's body, which was found with undigested food in her stomach, Hemraj had just 25 milliliters of liquid in his, indicating that he did not have dinner. This evidence was backed up by the fact that his dinner was found untouched in the kitchen on the morning of May 16th. The results of both autopsies stated that the time of death for both victims was between the hours of 12 a.m. and 6 a.m. on May 16th. Therefore, the fact that Hemraj's dinner was untouched was surprising, as usually he would have eaten before this time and had, indeed, served himself around 10:30 p.m. the previous night. Why had he not eaten when he regularly did? Amongst various other clues, one major thing that perplexed investigators was the doors and the keys. The door to Hemraj's room was locked from the inside. The keys to the main entrance were also found in his room. The duplicate set of keys was with Rajesh and Nupur in their bedroom. In this scenario, the only way the keys could have been found inside Hemraj's room after the mesh door was locked from the outside was if the keys were brought in through Hemraj's room and then the key was locked from the inside. Since Hemraj and Aarushi were both murdered, this allowed for only three possibilities. 1. Either one or both of the Talwars were involved in the murder. 2. Either one or both of them allowed the murderer or murderers to exit and then collected the keys from them. Or 3. There was another set of keys that so far had not been mentioned by anyone related to the case. Another strange piece of evidence the police uncovered was when they went through Aarushi's phone records. In the 2 weeks prior to her murder, her last recorded usage of her phone on each night was never earlier than 11:20 p.m. In fact, on most nights, her last recorded usage was well past midnight. However, on the night of her murder, she last used her phone at 9:10 p.m. Why did she not use it again on this particular night? Was she aware that something was going to happen? We can only speculate. The whiskey bottle that was found on the dining room table in the morning had been removed from a concealed bar that the Talwars had in the living area. The fact that the bar was hidden meant that whoever removed it knew the house well. The bottle was covered with bloodstains of both Aarushi and Hemraj, but sadly no fingerprints could be recovered from it. Otherwise, it could have been a key piece of evidence into the investigation. From the details mentioned up until now, it must already be clear just how complex and convoluted this case was. Beginning with a lack of uncontaminated evidence, to the tampering of what little was available, the authorities investigating had an uphill battle from the very beginning. Add to that the fact that the case received widespread media coverage. The press were ruthless in bringing up accusations against everyone involved, even the deceased. The case quickly spun out of control. Over the next few years, the case would be investigated by multiple teams from different agencies, but none would be able to come up with a clear conclusion as to who had done this. In the first few days after Hemraj's body was discovered, police suspected the Talwar's former domestic help, Vishnu Sharma, was behind the murders. He was replaced by Hemraj, who he himself had recommended to the Talwars. Police believed he'd killed him for taking his job, and Aarushi may have been killed for being a witness. They named him as a suspect on May 19th and took him into custody, but lacked any tangible evidence to connect him to the murders. His alibi was established, and it was confirmed that he was in Nepal at the time the murders took place. He was released from police custody, and investigators were again at square one, scrambling for new leads. On May 21st, Delhi police joined the UP police in the investigation. By this time, the police, as well as the media, had begun to suspect foul play on the parents' part for multiple reasons. This included the fact that Aarushi's bedroom was right next to her parents', yet they claimed to have slept through the murders without hearing any noise. Another reason was that Aarushi's room was generally locked from the inside, and the only key to it was by Nupur's bedside. Yet the morning after the murder, the key was in the living room, and they had no answer as to how it got there. Rajesh encouraging the police to pursue Hemraj before his body was discovered was thought to be a diversionary tactic by the police, and only increased their suspicions. The fact he ignored the police's request for the key to the terrace door only added to this. Aarushi's body and the crime scene in her bedroom had been cleaned, with her stuffed toys being placed on her bed and her bag being placed over her head after she was killed. The police could not find any motive for an outsider to have done this. And finally, the phone calls Rajesh's brother Dinesh had made to try and remove all mentions of sexual assault from the autopsy report also raised suspicions. All of these reasons gave the police cause to suspect the Talwars, and they were about to be given one more that led them to arrest Rajesh. They were told by one of his employees that he was allegedly having an affair with Anita Durrani, the wife of the dentist couple that the Talwars shared their clinic with. Inspector General Gurdarshan Singh, who was leading the investigation at this time, speculated on scenarios that could have led to the murders. His theory was that Hemraj knew about the alleged affair and was blackmailing Rajesh. Rajesh took Hemraj to the terrace on the pretext of discussing the issue, but ended up killing him. Aarushi was a witness to this act and also objected to her father's affair, and she was killed to ensure her silence. Another theory he floated at the time was that Aarushi was aware of her father's affair and confided in Hemraj, and may have even entered a relationship with him. On the night of the murder, Rajesh had entered Arushi's room late at night, where he found Aarushi and Hemraj in an objectionable, though not compromising, position. Seeing this, he took Hemraj to the terrace and killed him, and then came back downstairs. He then drank the whiskey in the bottle found on the table, and then, in a drunken state, killed his daughter. On May 23rd, Rajesh and Nupur were taken to the police lines area, where they were separated. When Nupur was kept in a room with a female constable, Rajesh was arrested and taken to a local magistrate and subsequently to Dasna jail. Rajesh later claimed that the magistrate did not allow him to make any phone calls, and police threatened him into signing a confession on the way to the jail. Since it was Friday, Rajesh could not apply for bail until Monday. He had to spend the weekend in jail. He later stated that the police again threatened him to sign the confession while he was in their custody. After this, public opinion began to turn against the Talwars. Many of their friends began to avoid them. The Fortis Hospital fired Rajesh from his position as head of the dental department. However, the members of the Indian Dental Association and former patients professed their belief in Rajesh's innocence. Additionally, Arushi's friends and relatives were enraged by the character assassination taking place against the Talwars, as well as the deceased Aarushi. Their names were being dragged through the mud by the press, as well as by police authorities, who were making claims without any evidence. Renuka Chowdhury, the Minister for Women and Child Development, demanded the suspension of Inspector General Singh for the accusations he had made against Aarushi without any proof. Singh was transferred a month later. On May 31st, the case was transferred to the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, per the request of the Talwars, who stated that the police were trying to frame them to cover up the fact that they'd botched the investigation. In June, the CBI started investigating the case under Joint Director Arun Kumar. The Talwars provided counter-arguments against the points that had led them to being suspects. They said that both rooms had the air conditioner on since it was a hot summer night, and the noise from these units was the reason they were able to sleep through the murders. Nupur stated she may have left the key to Arushi's room in the door when she went to turn on the Wi-Fi router the previous night, which could be how the murderer entered the room. Rajesh also stated that he urged the police to pursue Hemraj because, being missing, he was the obvious suspect. He also claimed to not remember the police asking him for the keys to the terrace door. Rajesh's brother denied asking KK Gautam to use his influence to change the post-mortem report. He claimed that CBI could not find any record of him making calls to the post-mortem house. Since the crime scene was compromised and evidence was lacking, the CBI turned to polygraph and brain mapping tests. Both Rajesh and Nupur took and passed 2 polygraphs and a brain mapping test. No evidence of deception on their part was found.
Subjected to polygraph test twice. Again, in the first polygraph test remained inconclusive. There was no conclusion drawn. And in the second polygraph test, no deception has been found in her responses.
Following this, the CBI began to look into other possible leads and suspects. In the next phase of the investigation, the CBI began to look at 3 individuals, all employed by the Talwars, and friends of Hemraj who could have been the killers. According to the Talwars, the claims about Rajesh's extramarital affair and an affair between Aarushi and Hemraj were both planted by Krishna Tadarai, an assistant at the Talwars dental clinic. Rajesh stated that 2 days prior to the murders, he had scolded Tadarai for making an incorrect dental cast. This was supported by Anita Durrani. Rajesh's driver, Umesh Sharma, stated that he had heard Tadarai and Hemraj talking loudly in Nepali while in the car. When he inquired as to what they were talking about, Tadarai told him that he would deal with Rajesh. On June 7th, Tadarai was detained by the CBI. The CBI team searched his house, where they found a blood-stained pillow cover and kukri knife. He then underwent a number of tests, including a polygraph test and a narco-analysis test. In a narco test, the subject is given narcotics which put them in a semi-conscious state in which their ability to lie is greatly hindered. However, these tests are not admissible as evidence in court as they're not always reliable. During his narco test, Tadarai spoke of a second murderer. Based on this, the CBI began investigating his friend Rajkumar, who was the domestic help for the Duranis, the couple that ran the clinic alongside the Talwars. Between June 23rd and 26th, Rajkumar was also subjected to a number of the same tests as Tadarai. He was then arrested on suspicion on June 27th. On June 30th, Vijay Mandal, another friend of Tadarai, was reported as a suspect in the media. Mandal was a driver and domestic help for Talwar's neighbor, Punish Tandon. Hemraj, Tadarai, and Rajkumar were all of Nepali origin and had been recruited through Vishnu, the ex-servant of the Talwars who was the initial suspect in the case. On July 9th, Rajkumar was put through a second narco-analysis test, and the next day the media reported that he had confessed to the murders. On July 11th, Vijay Mandal, who was already being investigated, was also arrested. That same day, lead investigator Arun Kumar gave a press conference in which he said the case was still unsolved, but it seemed like Tadarai, Rajkumar, and Mandal were the prime suspects based on the narco tests. However, the narco tests on their own were not enough for conviction, as there were many differences between the statements the men had given during their respective tests. Tadarai himself had given 3 different versions of the story. Based on the statements of the men, the CBI built this timeline of events. Hemraj had invited all 3 to his quarters that night, and the men arrived around midnight. The 4 men started drinking beer. Tadarai spoke of his humiliation by Rajesh Talwar and expressed his desire to take revenge. Arushi's door was surprisingly unlocked that night. But from this point, each statement was different in what they said had happened. Here's what the men said. In Rajkumar's version, Aarushi threatened to expose what the suspects said about her father, so Tadarai took out his kukri and killed her. Then, when the suspects planned to flee, Hemraj got cold feet and threatened to expose them. Tadarai and Rajkumar then dragged Hemraj to the terrace and killed him. After, they destroyed the mobile phones of Aarushi and Hemraj. In Tadarai's first version of events, he stated that he and Rajkumar had entered Arushi's room and tried to sexually assault her, and when she'd resisted, Tadarai himself took out his kukri and killed her. They then dragged Hemraj to the terrace and killed him because he was a witness. In Tadarai's second version of events, he stated that it was Rajkumar and Mandal who entered Arushi's room and tried to assault her. When she resisted, Mandal hit her on the head and Rajkumar slit his throat with a kukri. The 3 of them then took Hemraj to the terrace and killed him before escaping off the roof after locking the terrace door. In Tadarai's third version of events, he stated that Rajkumar entered and tried to assault Aarushi while he and Mandal followed him. When she resisted, Tadarai killed her with his kukri. Hemraj then got scared and threatened to tell the Talwars, so the 3 men took him to the terrace and killed him. The 3 of them then returned downstairs and tried to enter the Talwars' room, but found it locked. While these statements do perhaps indicate some form of guilt, the CBI could not use them as evidence and eventually had to release all 3 men for a number of reasons. Firstly, all 3 men had alibis. Tatarai's family and landlord confirmed that he was at home the night of the murders. Vijay Mandal's employer also confirmed that he was in his garage the night the murders took place. Rajkumar was the only one whose alibi was only confirmed till 12:30 a.m. on the night of the murders. Secondly, no physical evidence could be found tying the men to the scene of the crime. Their fingerprints did not match any lifted from the scene, and the bloody kukri found in Tatarai's room turned out to be animal blood, not human. And finally, the narco tests alone were not considered sufficient evidence to be used for conviction, as they were inadmissible in court. Additionally, Rajkumar's lawyer, Naresh Yadav, approached the National Human Rights Commission, NHRC, stating that the three men had been tortured by the CBI officers during the investigation. In January 2009, the CBI announced that they were ready to file charges against Tatarai, Rajkumar, and Mandal. However, in the absence of any hard evidence, they could not do so. Arun Kumar's time at the CBI ended in September 2009. A new CBI team was given the case that same month. This new team was headed by the SP, Superintendent of Police, Neelab Kishore. An additional SP, AGL Kaul, served as the investigating officer. The new CBI team looked at the entire crime again with fresh eyes. For them, the parents were once again the prime suspects. Apart from the oddities discovered in the previous investigation into the couple, they also found some additional points of interest. Both doctors who conducted the autopsies on Aarushi and Hemraj gave new statements containing new information. Dr. Door stated that Arushi's hymen was ruptured and her private parts appeared to have been cleaned. Dr. Naresh Raj stated that Hemraj's swollen private parts indicated the possibility of sexual intercourse. In October 2009, the CBI conducted another analysis of the crime scene based on the photographs that had been taken, and the analysis supported the theory that the crime scene had been cleaned and staged after the murders. Most importantly, the new team identified the weapon that had been used to inflict the blunt injuries as a golf club. Specifically, one of the clubs in the set owned by Rajesh himself. On October 29, 2009, the CBI asked Rajesh to send his golf set to them, and he complied the very next day, sending them over. The CBI later stated that the dimensions of the golf club bearing number 5 were identical to the dimensions of the injuries on the heads of both victims. It seemed they had found their murder weapon. But because it was over a year later, no evidence was found on the club to link it to the murders. Neelab Kishore once again questioned the Talwars in his Dehradun office on May 18th and 19th of 2010. A few days later, a story appeared in the Pioneer newspaper stating that Aarushi had been killed by Rajesh in an honor killing. This article quoted unnamed sources in the CBI. On July 21st, Rajesh asked the court to pass an order of restraint against the unethical and misleading information being published by the print media outlets. On December 29, 2010, the CBI filed a closure report, recommending that the case be closed due to insufficient evidence, but naming Rajesh as the sole suspect. In the report, they stated that the parents were the only people who had a reason and ability to clean up the crime scene. They also officially cleared Tatarai, Rajkumar, and Mandal, stating that all three had alibis and there was no evidence linking them to the crime. They ruled out any other outside intruders, as there were no signs of forced entry, and an intruder would have no reason to clean up the crime scene and hide Hemraj's body. Finally, they stated the complete lack of physical evidence they had found at the crime scene as insufficient to continue the investigation. It was recommended that the case be closed for good. In January 2011, the Talwars filed a petition protesting the closure of the case with Rajesh as the sole suspect. However, their petition was rejected by the magistrate Preeti Singh of the Special CBI Court in Ghaziabad. On February the 9th, she turned the closure report into a charge sheet and summoned Rajesh and Nupur as the accused to come and stand before the court. The Talwars petitioned both the Allahabad High Court and then the Supreme Court against being summoned and proceedings being initiated against them. However, both courts rejected their pleas. Their formal trial began on May 11, 2013. In the trial, the parents were accused of destroying evidence, misleading investigators, and filing wrongful petitions to the court, as well as the two murders. On November 25, 2013, the special CBI court held Rajesh and Nupur Talwar as guilty for both murders, along with the other charges that were leveled against them. The next day, on November 26th, they were sentenced to life imprisonment for the double murders. The Talwar family were outraged and called the verdict a miscarriage of justice. In January 2014, they raised an appeal against the decision in the Allahabad High Court. Subsequently, a long and weary legal battle dragged on for over 3 years. On October 12, 2017, the High Court acquitted the Talwars of all charges, stating that the evidence against them was insufficient. Due to this, it was ruled that they should be given the benefit of the doubt and should not be convicted based solely on suspicions. Hemraj's wife and brother in Nepal were highly critical of the verdict, and they continue to believe that the Talwars are guilty. On March 8, 2018, the CBI challenged the acquittal in the Supreme Court, and on August 10, 2018, the Supreme Court accepted the appeal. The trial is yet to begin.
Careful 911, where's your emergency?
Hi, my name is John Carter. I know that you're not supposed to report a missing person before 24 hours, but my fiance is missing. I can't find her anywhere.
On August 14, 2011, a haunting 911 call came through in Fairfield, Indiana. John Carter, age 23, reported his fiancée was missing from their townhome. The police sprang into action, but 21-year-old Katelyn Markham was nowhere to be found. Months passed, and just when it seemed all hope was lost, a chilling discovery linked to Katelyn's disappearance emerged. As the shockwaves rippled through the community, an anonymous benefactor stepped forward with a significant donation. What clues did they uncover? And what twists does this case hold? Katelyn Markham was born on August 16, 1990, in Hamilton County, Ohio. Little is known about her early life, but she studied graphic arts while also working at a bridal shop. Katelyn had a bright and cheery personality. She always wanted everyone around her to be happy and in a good mood. In 2010, 20-year-old Katelyn got engaged to 22-year-old John Carter, her long-term boyfriend. After she finished school, Katelyn and her fiancé, Carter, planned to move to Colorado. They'd been together for 6 years and engaged for 1, but an unexpected tragedy was awaiting to shock them. 3 days prior to Katelyn Markham's 21st birthday, on August 13, 2011, was the last time she was seen. Her fiancé, Carter, said he saw her around midnight on the 13th, but then couldn't get in touch with her all the next day. Gripped by panic, Carter also reached out to Katelyn's father, David Markham, and told him that Katelyn was missing. On the evening of August 14, 2011, the 911 emergency helpline received a call from Carter.
Careful 911, where's your emergency?
Hi, my name is John Carter. I know that you're not supposed to report a missing person before 24 hours, but my fiance is missing. I can't find her anywhere.
Okay, where did you see her last?
I saw her at like 12 o'clock last night. Car is still there. Her purse is still...
Okay, and you're out there now?
I'm heading out there now. I had been trying to get a hold of her, and I decided to go by her house to see if she was okay, and her car was still there, which is why I'm really freaking out.
Okay, and you guys didn't have an argument or anything?
Not at all. And the Sacred Heart Festival is going on right up the street, and there's a lot of questionable people there.
It had been 18 hours since John Carter claimed to have last seen his fiancée. When David heard the news, consumed by worry, he hurried to his daughter's place. There, he was met by Fairfield Police Department's Detective Rebecca Irvin, who had arrived swiftly in response to the distressing situation. Upon entering Katelyn's condo, Irvin began her thorough investigation, meticulously examining every corner. Yet nothing stood out as a clear indicator of what had transpired. There were no signs of forced entry, and no traces of a struggle within Katelyn's bedroom.
There's no signs of forced entry into the townhome. We check the doors, check the windows, check everywhere. There's nothing that's jumping out. There's no signs of a struggle.
As the investigators from the Fairfield Police Department delved deeper, they made a discovery. Katelyn's purse and car keys were found abandoned in the middle of her bed. The bedroom also harbored Katelyn's loyal companion, Murphy, her dog who had been locked in the room. It struck them as odd since they were told that Kathlyn had never locked up her beloved pet before this. Her purse and car keys were placed in the center of the bed, a detail that Detective Irvin couldn't ignore.
The dog had been locked in her bedroom, which she's not usually locked in the bedroom, and he had gone to the bathroom in there. Her purse and her keys were smack dab in the middle of her bed. If I'm going to bed, I don't put something right in the middle of it. Nothing seemed to make any sense at all.
It struck her as peculiar, since one doesn't typically arrange belongings like that before settling in for the night. The Fairfield police thought that something was amiss. Testimonies from friends and family further emphasized the oddness of the situation, as it was entirely out of character for Kathlyn to go out without notice. With just 3 weeks remaining until her graduation from art school, her engagement to Carter, and their imminent move to Colorado, she appeared genuinely content and brimming with excitement for the future.
This was not for her not to call anybody, for her not to do anything. I felt something was wrong.
So, nobody could understand why Kathlyn would run away from home. In the midst of this, the suspense surrounding Kathlyn's mysterious disappearance grew. 20 heartbreaking months passed without a clue. But then, finally, there was a break in the case. On April 7, 2013, a husband and wife were scavenging for metal to recycle along Big Cedar Road in Franklin County, Indiana. As they searched, they stumbled upon a startling discovery.
Just, digging through this little area here, picking up some metal, and here found a jawbone right on the other side of that little tree right there, right between them two little trees.
Husband and wife that were looking for metal to recycle along Big Cedar Road in Franklin County, Indiana. While they were searching for the metals, they located some human bones. I was called to investigate the remains.
Alarmed, they promptly alerted the authorities, who arrived to investigate the remains. The site where the bones were found was in Indiana, nearly 25 miles away from Kathlyn's townhome, tucked amidst discarded trash in a not-so-known dumping area. Crime scene investigators cleared away debris, uncovering multiple bones, including a skull and jawbone. Their attention was drawn to a protruding tooth that caught their eye, an easily recognizable feature. Reacting swiftly, one of the county sheriff's deputies reached for his phone, searching for any missing persons.
When we were looking at the skull, we noticed a tooth that was protruding, pretty identifiable. And so one of the county sheriff's deputies, he got on his phone and started looking for anybody that was missing.
In a stroke of luck, Katelyn Markham's photo appeared as the first result. Comparing it to her missing report, they couldn't help but notice the striking resemblance, particularly the distinctive protruding tooth. The local forensic anthropologist confirmed the positive identification of the remains as belonging to Katelyn Markham.
When we looked at the picture of her missing report, we could almost identify her directly from her teeth.
2 days later, the pastor and detectives solemnly shared the heartbreaking news with Kathlyn's father.
And a couple of days later, I get a knock on the door from the pastor and the detective, and I knew what they were there to tell me.
But how in the world did Kathlyn end up dead in a trash heap in Indiana, 25 miles away from her native place? In the small town of Fairfield, Ohio, the residents were desperate for answers regarding the unsolved mysteries surrounding Kathlyn's disappearance. 3 years after the death of Kathlyn, in 2014, unexpectedly, an anonymous donor, with no personal connection to the case but a deep desire for justice and solving unresolved puzzles, made a generous donation. This individual, driven by the wish to do something kind before their own passing, provided a substantial sum of money to help with the case. With the infusion of funds, David Markham hired private investigator J. Ryan Green to re-examine the case.
He's an individual that wanted to do something nice for somebody before he died, is what he told me. Felt Kathlyn needed an outside investigator to come in and take a fresh look at the case.
The donor believed that Kathlyn's situation required an outsider's perspective to shed new light on the matter. Starting afresh, Green began by carefully listening to the 911 call made by John Carter on the night he reported Kathlyn missing. Listening to the call, he learned that Carter had conveyed information that did not sound entirely truthful to the sharpened ears of private investigator Green.
Car is still there. Her purse is still...
Okay. And you're out there now?
I'm heading out there now. I have been trying to get a hold of her, and I decided to go by her house to see if she was okay, and her car was still there, which is why I'm, really freaking out.
During the 911 call, Carter informed the operator that Kathlyn's car and purse were present at her home. However, when asked if he was there, he stated that he was on his way. This discrepancy raised a question in Green's mind. How could Carter know about the car and purse if he hadn't arrived at the scene yet? Additionally, Green highlighted that Carter mentioned visiting Kathlyn's house after running an errand before making the 911 call. This sequence of events seemed puzzling. Why would someone prioritize running an errand before expressing panic and seeking immediate help? After this, Green emphasized another portion of the call where Carter said that he and Kathlyn did not have a fight or any argument.
Okay, and you guys didn't have an argument or anything?
Not at all.
Green was aware that Kathlyn's best friend Michelle had provided a contrasting account of events, saying that Kathlyn and Carter had an argument 2 days prior.
I knew that they were fighting, and when he was on the 911 tape, when he was saying that they hadn't been arguing at all, I'm just like, why would you lie about that part of it?
The question arose, why would Carter fabricate that particular detail? The Markham family's attorney, who had prior experience as a firefighter and paramedic, listened to the 911 call and made an observation. Typically, a 911 call serves as an urgent plea for assistance. However, in John Carter's case, it seemed more like an informative report.
I have heard my share of 911 calls. I've made 911 calls. And a 911 call is usually a call for help. That's what it is. Call for help. John Carter's call was a call to inform.
And the Sacred Heart Festival is going on right up the street, and there's a lot of questionable people there.
The lawyer also pointed out that Carter quickly put forward a theory, suggesting that some individuals at the carnival had taken his girlfriend.
He immediately offered up a theory. You noticed an hour ago that your girlfriend isn't where she's supposed to be, and the carnies took her? I mean, that's a leap.
However, this accusation seemed like a significant leap without substantial evidence. In short, Carter called 911 to inform them about a possible crime when he should have just stuck with the disappearance. Eventually, Kathlyn's fiancé underwent a voice stress analysis test, which reportedly yielded inconclusive results. He also took 2 polygraph tests, but the authorities did not disclose the outcomes, as it was still too early to draw any conclusions. Meanwhile, private investigator Green placed significant importance on the location where Kathlyn's body was discovered, considering it a crucial piece of the puzzle. The location where Kathlyn's remains were discovered turned out to be an illegal dump site. This meant that only a few people would be familiar with its existence.
This was an illegal dump site where she was found. So somebody knew about the dump site and somebody just tossed her here like a piece of trash.
However, someone who was aware of it chose to dispose of Kathlyn's remains there. In an insane turn of events, investigator Green made a significant discovery during his inquiry. He uncovered information indicating that the Carter family owned property in the vicinity of the dumping site. The proximity between the illegal dump site and John Carter's family home led Green to believe that this connection was more than just a mere coincidence.
It troubles me a lot to know that, the Carter family has property in this area.
The road leading to the dump site aligned with the route John Carter would have taken to reach his family's property. This fact caught Green's attention.
This road is in close proximity to where John Carter would have traveled to go to his family's property.
Furthermore, police investigators held the belief that Kathlyn met her demise in Ohio and her body was subsequently dumped in Indiana. Based on his investigation, Green developed a theory regarding the involvement of an accomplice in moving Kathlyn's body. He focused his attention on Brad Von Bargen, a friend of Carter's who was present at Katelyn's apartment on the night she went missing, along with Carter. Notably, Brad had left the apartment earlier than Carter on the night Katelyn disappeared.
There was a friend at Katelyn's apartment besides John Carter the last night she was seen. That friend left a little earlier than John did.
Additionally, Green discovered that Brad had sold his cherished car, which he referred to as his baby, shortly after Katelyn's remains were found in 2013. When questioned about the rushed sale, Brad claimed it was due to his urgent need to travel to North Carolina.
He drove a car that he referred to as his baby, and I found out that he no longer had his baby. He sold it in 2013, just after Katelyn was found. He sold it in a rush and said that he needed to leave to go to North Carolina.
Delving further into the matter, Green managed to track down the car, a green 1997 Hector, which Brad had been driving on the night he departed from Katelyn's home. The authorities conducted a luminol test on the car. To everyone's surprise, they discovered traces of blood in the trunk area.
I had it sent to police as a crime scene. They did a luminol test. There was evidence of blood in the trunk area.
This significant finding implicated the man, Brad Von Bargen, whom Green believed was the second-to-last person to have seen Katelyn Markham alive. Unfortunately, this potential breakthrough in the case came too late. The car had been cleaned using shampoos and detergents, which can compromise DNA and blood evidence, as Green pointed out.
I obtained a vehicle almost 4 years later. You have extreme cold in Cincinnati, and you have hot weather with the cleaning of the vehicle, shampooing, that messes with DNA.
And so, even after finding blood, the authorities couldn't determine whose blood it was. Despite Green's suspicions, the Fairfield Police Department did not consider Brad to be involved. Detective Irvin clarified that no one could be officially cleared as the investigation was still ongoing. Green remained frustrated by the fact that the car had not been tested at the time of Katelyn's disappearance, and consequently, the car angle was no longer a viable lead. Sometime later, Green obtained crucial evidence in the form of cell phone records from the night Katelyn disappeared. These records, according to investigator Green, contradicted previous statements made by John Carter to the police. To further delve into the matter, Carter and his mother Karen joined Green and his team for an interview. Investigator Green meticulously compared cell phone records with Carter's previous interviews regarding the night Katelyn disappeared. The first inconsistency investigated by Green was a text message that Carter claimed to have sent Katelyn, saying good morning on the day she went missing. However, the cell phone records obtained by Green indicated that no such message was sent. When confronted with this discrepancy, Carter insisted that he did send the text.
But according to the Fairfield police, or according to my phone records, I didn't send her anything, but I could have swore that I had sent her a message.
Carter's mother interjected and pointed out another anomaly in the cell phone records: the absence of the 911 call made by Carter. She rightly observed that if the 911 call was missing from the records, the text message incident could also be a result of a glitch or discrepancy.
No, he made. Nobody's questioning that, and yet it doesn't show up. How can we say that just because something else isn't showing up, that there wasn't something else?
Moving on, investigator Green turned his attention to a phone call Carter made to his friend Matt on the night Katelyn vanished. Carter's statements to the police indicated that he was on the phone with Matt while driving up to Katelyn's townhome. He claimed to have noticed her car in the driveway, which raised concerns.
Stop sign's here. You turn the corner, you go up into the drive, and you park. You walk across. Is that the way you remember it? Okay.
However, a crucial detail emerged from the cell phone records. Carter ended the call with Matt and, just 38 seconds later, dialed Katelyn's father, David Markham, in a panicked state, declaring that Katelyn was missing.
Called David Markham 38 seconds after you hung up with Matt. You wouldn't have even had time to go in the house for 38 seconds. If you're in the parking lot, you wouldn't have had a chance to even go into Katelyn's room in 38 seconds.
The timeline presented a significant inconsistency. According to Green's analysis, it would have been impossible for Carter to park, enter Katelyn's house, search her room, and then call her father within a mere 38 seconds. The limited time frame suggested that Carter already knew Katelyn was gone before entering the house. Although Carter claimed not to remember the exact order of his phone calls, the cell phone records presented a clear sequence of events.
In my investigative opinion, that he knew she was gone prior to him going into the house.
Green believed that the records strongly indicated that Carter had prior knowledge of Katelyn's absence before entering the house. There were more discrepancies in the investigation of Katelyn Markham's death. David Markham was frustrated by these because, with the help of Green, he found out many details that the Fairfield Police Department could have acted upon, but chose not to. David and Green wondered whether there was a miscommunication with the police department itself. On December 18, 2015, David Markham held a press conference urging the transfer of the murder investigation of Katelyn to the Butler County Sheriff's Office. Markham requested the Butler County Sheriff Richard Jones to lead the investigation, but Jones decided to collaborate with the city police instead of taking it over completely. On August 16th, on what would have been Markham's 27th birthday, her family and friends came together at the Springfield Cinema Deluxe for the premiere of a documentary called Taken Too Soon, The Katelyn Markham Story. It was directed by Michael Crisp. They hoped that the documentary would provide further insights into the details surrounding her death.
We want people to get to know her instead of just getting to know the face that was on all of these missing posters.
This heightened the people's interest in the Katelyn Markham case, and they asked the police for answers. On November 15, 2016, the police took notice of another murder in Fairfield itself. Back in 2014, 15-year-old Chelsea Jones was stabbed to death. At that time, the police thought they'd caught the killer, but on trial, the killer was released due to a lack of evidence. Now, police were wondering whether Katelyn had been murdered by the same person who killed Chelsea. But again, the police did not arrest the person of interest due to a lack of evidence. The investigation continued, but it was leading nowhere. However, the police did not announce the case to be closed, so the case never officially went cold. In the month of July 2019, 23-year-old Ellie Week went missing in Fairfield, and the police asked everyone to come in and help. But on August 24, 2019, Week's body was found. It was similar to what had happened in Katelyn's case. The police arrested a suspect known to be Michael Strauss. After hearing this information, David Markham went on social media to post that there was no doubt that these two cases had a connection, and Strauss should be a suspect in Katelyn's case too. On August 28, 2019, the police did a 10-minute press conference just to say that there was no connection between the two cases, and Katelyn's case was once again put on the back burner. However, Michael Strauss was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison. On January 23, 2020, the Butler County Prosecutor's Office chose Michael Teague Moser as the lead investigator in the ongoing investigation. On August 18, 2020, the authorities took a drive from the illegal dumping site to Katelyn's townhome. They found two main routes to reach there. They also found that John Carter's father owned some properties around that area. There's a specific site called Kokomo Hill where the Carters owned property. The Big Cedar Road, where Katelyn's remains were found, fell in between Carter's home and Kokomo Hill. Carter had previously revealed that Katelyn sometimes went to parties at Kokomo Hill, where she used to hang out with Carter and his friends, specifically a friend named Jonathan Palmerton. Surprisingly, it was on August 18th itself that the authorities also found black-colored plastic sheets and landscaping materials at John Carter's residence. It seemed similar to the material in which Katelyn's remains were wrapped in. On October 8, 2020, the authorities spoke to the president of Advanced Laminated Housing Structures, whose company built the Kokomo Hill property for the Carters. He compared both the materials and confirmed that while the materials found at Carter's home and the material used to wrap Katelyn's body were similar, they were not an exact match. But while interviewing different experts in the industry, Gmoser found that this material was not something that a homeowner would normally possess. It was usually something that industry professionals would use. This material was also very durable, which is why Kathlyn's remains were found inside of it even after 20 months had passed. The material had even endured a water stream that flowed near the dumping site. On January 28, 2021, John Carter was called again to take the polygraph tests. The investigators concluded that his answers were again deceptive. He'd also given deceptive answers in his previous polygraph tests. On March 29th and 30th, 2022, the police interviewed two teenage boys separately. They were Kathlyn's neighbors. On the night of Kathlyn's disappearance, both the teenage boys had snuck out of their house to go to the Sacred Hearts Festival and witnessed two vehicles, including a red Ford Focus believed to be driven by John Carter, entering the driveway and the garage of the house. It was around 2 a.m. The cars had their lights off, and they stayed in the garage briefly before leaving. This behavior raised suspicion, as intentionally driving without headlights is a red flag for law enforcement. The red Ford Focus, confirmed to belong to Carter through registration and his admission, was in the garage for about 5 to 15 minutes before heading out. On April 14, 2022, the police interviewed Jonathan Palmerton, who was a longtime friend of Carter's. He was also interviewed in 2011 and 2012. Both the interviews were compared, and the police found out that Palmerton had changed his statements and was being deceptive. On December 22, 2022, Gmoser interviewed a private investigator. Apparently, on August 16, 2011, 2 days after Kathlyn's disappearance, Carter had called this private investigator and asked if she'd be interested in investigating the case. Carter had also asked her about the steps taken by the police in a murder investigation. The private investigator said that during their conversation, Carter talked about Kathlyn in the past tense. This indicated that Carter already knew that Kathlyn was dead, but her remains would not be found until 20 months after this conversation. From all these clues, it looked like the investigation was going in the right direction, and Carter appeared to be a suspect. On February 17, 2023, the Butler County Common Pleas Court ordered a search warrant to search John Carter's mother's residence that he'd lived in until 2021. They found drawing of angels in the woods in his home, and also surreal poetries written about death. These poems were in reference to a loved one, which they believed to be Katelyn Markham. It was on this day that the first arrest in the Katelyn Markham case was made. The police arrested Jonathan Palmerton on the counts of perjury, as he'd lied to the investigators. Then, on March 22, 2023, the police arrested John Carter, suspecting him to be involved in the disappearance of Katelyn Markham. Following the grand jury's indictment for the murder of Katelyn Markham, John Carter was captured on body camera footage as he was taken into custody. At first, he expressed willingness to speak with detectives, but later he changed his mind and requested a lawyer. Carter entered a plea of not guilty and was released on a $1 million bond. The prosecutor in the case revealed that several writings were discovered in John Carter's home addressing themes of love and death. One particular passage found stated, "Deep down, I love her. You want to kill her, but I love her. She must die." Another message was scribbled on a door saying, "I slit your wrists with the key to your heart." Katelyn Markham's father, Dave Markham, who'd waited a long time for this, thought that they were finally on the right track.
I've been let down too many times, though, to get too encouraged. It is a positive move. It is a good thing, but it's still not over. It's not solved.
After the news of the arrest, David expressed his feelings about Katelyn and Carter's relationship. He said that Katelyn had desired to move to Colorado alone and had been feeling burdened by her partner. He added that she took on all the planning and expenses while Carter didn't save money or contribute. Frustrated and unhappy, she wanted to end the relationship due to the pain, trouble, and lack of commitment. The search warrant affidavit that was unsealed in late April 2023 revealed a great deal of information surrounding the case. It mentioned that there were claims stating that John Carter and another person, whose name was redacted, disposed of Katelyn Markham's body. The police were seeking a warrant to search his mother's house for black plastic or construction and landscaping sheeting, which they believed was used to wrap Katelyn's body. While finding such material was not definitive proof, it was significant evidence that aligned with the prosecution's case. However, it was important to consider that individual possession of the material didn't imply guilt in the murder case. When solving cases like this, which had been ongoing for almost 12 years, circumstantial evidence played a crucial role in putting together the puzzle and gaining a clearer understanding of what transpired. The affidavit also revealed that during the police interview conducted on the day Katelyn Markham was reported missing and the following day, police had observed red vertical scratches on John Carter's neck. He attributed them to shaving. However, the police said that it was really unlikely that an electric razor could have caused the scratches, as Carter claimed. In addition to this, friends who were with Carter and Katelyn on the night before she disappeared stated they hadn't seen any scratches on him. Around the time of Katelyn Markham's disappearance, there were plans for her and Carter to move to Colorado, but it was believed that she was becoming less interested in their relationship and that things weren't going well between them. John's mother even offered to co-sign a credit card application for Katelyn if she agreed to take him to Colorado, but it seems she declined and didn't proceed with the application. This information provides insight into the dynamics between Katelyn and John at the time of her disappearance. According to her friends, Katelyn expressed feeling trapped, losing attraction towards John, and being concerned about his drug use and unconventional sexual desires. These details, among others, could help build a strong case against John Carter when he goes to trial. At this stage, John Carter maintains his innocence. He's been released on a $1 million bond, and his trial is scheduled for June 2024. There may be upcoming court appearances for status hearings or related matters. It's not surprising to many that John Carter was later charged with Katelyn's murder, although some people were taken aback. It took 11.5 years for charges to be filed, which is disappointing, as he had the freedom to carry on with his daily life, while Katelyn was denied that opportunity. The evidence against him is substantial, and it's a relief that the suspicions were not unfounded. Do you think that John Carter will be found guilty? Or do you think that pieces of evidence against him are still not substantial enough for sentencing? On September 25, 1994, in the quiet town of Jonesboro, Georgia, Douglas Overstreet, a 37-year-old well-regarded police lieutenant, vanished without a trace after a camping trip, leaving his loved ones and the community in a state of distress. The investigation took a startling twist when an unexpected passerby stumbled upon a lifeless body bearing the chilling signs of a heinous crime near Lake Thurmond. As detectives embarked on their search for answers, they uncovered a web of lies, revealing a disturbing truth. Who was behind the gruesome act? What dark secrets led to this devastating outcome? This case takes us to Jonesboro, a charming suburban city in Clayton County, Georgia, located about 15 miles south of downtown Atlanta. With a rich history dating back to the early 1800s, Jonesboro has transformed into a dynamic community with a diverse population. It offers a blend of residential areas, commercial districts, and natural beauty. The city boasts numerous parks, cultural attractions, and local businesses, providing ample opportunities for recreation and entertainment. Despite this, however, the crime rate in Clayton County is about 50% higher than the U.S. average. It was also the setting of a heinous crime that took place in September 1994. Let's first go back to the beginning, when Douglas Lee Overstreet entered this world on April 10, 1957.
He grew up in northwest Atlanta in a working class neighborhood, and all he ever wanted to do was be a police officer.
He was the first child of Awen Leroy Overstreet and Inez Brannon Overstreet, a family filled with love and adventure. In the Overstreet household, young Douglas had two younger siblings to share his journey with: Edith Overstreet, the youngest sibling, who was 10 years younger than Douglas, and Michael Overstreet, the middle son, who was 6 years younger than Douglas. Douglas Overstreet was known as Doug by those who knew him. At 37 years old, he held a prominent position as a lieutenant in the Atlanta Police Department, instilling a sense of safety and order within the community.
People go into police work for different reasons. A lot of people just want to have the power to push people around. That was not Doug. Doug was there because he wanted to help people.
In addition to his law enforcement duties, Doug embraced a part-time role as a security guard at the lively Rio Bravo bar in Buckhead. But there was more to Doug than his professional life. He was passionate about adventure, and whenever he had time, he used to venture into the wilderness, indulging in his passion for camping. Armed with a camera, he loved to capture the beauty of his surroundings as a precious memory. With his gentle and friendly nature, Doug made it a point to connect with his neighbors, often extending warm invitations for tea and heartfelt conversations. In the year 1984, Doug, at the age of 27, found love and companionship when he married Candace Overstreet, a 40-year-old woman who already had 2 daughters.
Candace had 2 daughters from a previous marriage. They were small children when he and Candace got married, so Doug was pretty much the father figure in their life.
Their blended family included Brandy Overstreet, the elder daughter at 21 years old, who preferred the comforts of home and had a more introverted nature. Keisha Overstreet, on the other hand, was a vibrant 19-year-old college student. Douglas cherished his role as a stepfather, forming strong bonds with both Brandy and Keisha. Whenever he returned home, he'd bring thoughtful gifts to show his affection and make them feel special. On September 25, 1994, Doug eagerly embarked on a solo trip. However, as evening approached, Doug had not yet made his way back as he was expected to return home by evening. As the hours ticked by and nightfall loomed, the growing unease settled upon the household, for there was no sign or communication from Doug. Growing increasingly worried, the family launched an extensive search, leaving no stone unturned in their efforts to find him. However, despite their best efforts, Doug remained elusive. It wasn't until 3 days later, on September 28, 1994, that his wife, Candace, reported him missing. An officer was sent to their residence in Jonesboro, Georgia, to speak with Candace and gather the complete account about Doug's disappearance.
She went ahead and went to bed, and when she woke up the next morning, he wasn't there. By the afternoon, when he didn't show up, she started to worry.
Candace informed the officer that Doug had embarked on a camping trip 3 days earlier, but there'd been no communication or updates since then.
Big question was, well, where's Doug? She says, I don't know.
She'd contacted Doug's friends and employers, yet none of them had any information to share. However, the officer found it slightly peculiar that Candace had waited for 3 days before reporting Doug's disappearance.
On Monday the 26th and maybe Tuesday the 27th, it was, I would say, more concern and worry and curiosity. But then by Wednesday, she was getting angry because I think she believed he ran off with a woman.
Typically, spouses would promptly reach out to authorities, either on the same night or at least by the following morning, expressing concern for their missing partners. Intrigued by this aspect, the officer gently inquired about the nature of their relationship, hoping to uncover any potential underlying factors that might shed light on the unusual delay. But according to Candace, their marriage was nothing short of perfect, and Doug had a strong bond with his stepdaughters. However, she revealed that Douglas had been facing challenges in his professional life, such as being overlooked for a promotion and being caught up in the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, inquiry involving his unit.
He had been up for a promotion, and I don't think he had gotten the promotion, and he was struggling with whether he should leave the department or stay.
Candace expressed her fear that these difficulties might have driven Doug to contemplate taking his own life, leaving investigators with a haunting possibility to consider.
I believe some of the officers thought that there was a chance he might have taken his own life.
Investigators wasted no time in launching their investigation and started with interviewing the neighbors. They were hoping to uncover any hints of unusual activity or a glimpse of something out of the ordinary that they would have noticed on that fateful September day in 1994.
There's not a lot that you can do proactively other than posting the lookout of Doug and his vehicle.
However, despite their efforts, the neighbors appeared as clueless as the investigators themselves and were unable to shed any light on the mysterious events of that day. The police left no stone unturned in their search for Doug as they meticulously scoured every place he was known to visit and also issued an all-points bulletin for his truck. Given his position as the head of the burglary unit, investigators didn't ignore the possibility that he might have made enemies. However, as they delved into his files and investigated his past, nothing much emerged to indicate that he'd become a target of anyone's revenge. The absence of any glaring clues or motives only deepened the mystery surrounding Doug's disappearance. After 2 days, on September 30th, 1994, Doug's truck was discovered in the long-term parking of the bustling Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport.
The vehicle of a missing Atlanta police officer was found today in the long-term parking at Hartsfield Airport.
The truck was in long-term parking at the Atlanta airport. Atlanta police had found it out there.
The authorities promptly photographed the truck at the airport before carefully transporting it to a secure warehouse.
I said, you know, they found his truck at the airport. We heard that on the news. And I said, maybe he just got on a plane. And I kept trying to just run through scenarios of where could he possibly have gone.
When the truck was found at the airport, that kind of confirmed the suspicions that he had taken off.
Inside, they meticulously combed through every inch, searching for any potential clues that could shed light on Doug's whereabouts. As they dusted for fingerprints and examined the vehicle for other evidence, the fingerprints they discovered belonged not to an unknown suspect, but to Doug's own family members. However, the presence of the fingerprints from the family on their house vehicle was not unusual, and they dismissed any possibility of them being involved. At this point, the FBI stepped in to lend their expertise to the case. A detective from the Clayton County Police Department revealed that the involvement of the FBI brought a new level of resources and capabilities to the search for answers. With the discovery of Doug's truck at the airport, law enforcement began considering the possibility that he might have taken a flight, either willingly or under pressure.
She follows him all over the top place. She calls him all the time. She shows up at his off-duty work, and that he may have just been fed up and just disappeared.
Missing persons cases are difficult in that respect because it can be anything and it could be nothing.
On October 1st, 1994, the investigation took another shocking turn when a passerby stumbled upon the lifeless body of a naked man in Lake Thurmond, near the Georgia-South Carolina border. The police reported the grim details of the scene and that the victim had been mercilessly shot.
It appeared that the body had been in the water a couple of days. There were 15 gunshot wounds.
It wasn't just a killing, it was a very vicious killing. Whoever did this was full of anger.
The Atlanta team working on Doug's case swiftly made their way to South Carolina. Using fingerprints, they confirmed the devastating truth. The body belonged to none other than Douglas Overstreet. Detectives began their homicide investigation by focusing on the placement and number of gunshot wounds on Doug's body.
It wasn't just your normal person shot 1 or 2 times. This person shot multiple times.
It was almost like a angry criminal that he'd put in prison, or maybe a family member of a criminal that he'd put in prison.
This isn't just somebody, going off on a lark. This is serious.
Surprisingly, it was revealed that at least 4 of the wounds were concentrated near his inner thigh, which hinted towards a deeply personal and potentially sinister motive behind the tragic event. When the police informed Candace about Doug's tragic death, that's when something strange happened.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Overstreet. We're here to talk to you about your husband.
And we told Candace that we had found Doug.
Her facial expressions gradually changed as she seemed nervous, like any of her wrong deeds had finally been caught. She pretended to be distraught and showed signs of being distressed. However, the investigators noticed the sudden change in her expression and started questioning about more information about Doug and his relations. That's when her story started to unravel. Initially, she portrayed their marriage as perfect, but later she changed her tune. She admitted to suspecting Doug of having an affair, implying that their seemingly flawless relationship had hidden cracks. These revelations prompted detectives to dig more into this complex web of secrets and into the true nature of Doug and Candace's marriage and its potential relevance to his untimely demise. As the investigation progressed, police discovered some evidence which indicated that Doug might have been involved in a relationship with a woman he met while working at Rio Bravo. But no further information was revealed about the woman by police. Doug's co-workers confirmed to investigators that Candace was aware of his social activities, like his networking events, and what he used to do whenever he was out, and to whom he met.
He was really one of those guys that probably shouldn't have been a police officer, because he never got violent, even in places other officers have said everybody would have reacted violently as a police officer. Always calm, cool, and collected. Just an all-around good man.
However, despite pursuing this lead, authorities were unable to identify any new suspects in connection with the case. On October 2nd, 1994, the medical report from Doug's autopsy was also released. In it, some startling findings emerged, revealing that not 1, but 2 different firearms had been used in his shooting. The autopsy report identified the weapons as a 9mm and a 38mm pistol. police again contacted Candace at her home to see if she could uncover any new insights into the case. To their surprise, Candace revealed that Doug had expensive habits, such as enjoying fine dining experiences and traveling frequently, and had accumulated debt. But she had no knowledge of the source of the loans.
His mother would call me. She said, Doug's getting a lot of return checks. You know, you could tell by the envelope what they were, and he would get as many as 6 in one day.
Detectives questioned why she hadn't disclosed this crucial information earlier, to which Candace explained that she didn't want to tarnish Doug's reputation by discussing his financial troubles. Investigators even looked into Doug's financial records, hoping to uncover any possible links to his mysterious fate.
Doug had borrowed money from friends and not repaid, and his salary was being garnished.
According to Frederick, Douglas's friends claimed that he'd borrowed money in order to appease his wife. However, despite all the leads, investigators couldn't establish a direct connection between his financial struggles and his untimely demise. Now, it was really frustrating for the investigators to continue their investigation without any definite lead. 3 days after the discovery of Doug's lifeless body, on October 4th, 1994, detectives made a condolence call to Candace. During their conversation, she casually mentioned that she'd be burying Doug's body with his badge, which she'd retrieved from Doug's cupboard. This seemingly casual remark instantly set off alarm bells among the investigators, as police officers rarely leave their homes without their badges. Suddenly, all the puzzling pieces of the case started falling into place. The contradictory statements from Candace, the fingerprints found on Doug's vehicle, and her overall suspicious behavior from the start.
He would have that. He wouldn't have left that.
If you have a badge, you do not leave home without it.
The spotlight now turned towards Candace, as the mounting evidence began to point a serious finger in her direction. Without wasting any time, and sought permission from Candace to conduct a thorough search as part of their investigation. As they stepped into the couple's bedroom, a startling revelation awaited them. It seemed as though Doug's existence had been erased from the room. All his belongings were suspiciously absent.
There was no men's clothes, no underwear, no T-shirts. People just don't take their loved ones' clothes, get rid of them that soon after something happens.
The investigators' attention then turned to the carpet, which appeared to have been disturbed.
It's all really nice and neat, and it's got brand new carpet on the floor. And I step on something.
To their surprise, they discovered bloodstains on the exposed subflooring, raising even more troubling questions about the events that had unfolded within those walls.
I walked back down the stairs, and I just pulled Captain Reynolds over to the side, and I said, Captain, I've found a couple things up here. I think there's something's happened in this house.
However, the police left the residence without disclosing their discoveries to Candace and decided to exercise restraint as not to alert her. The next day, on October 5th, 1994, they obtained a search warrant. Upon their return, a more detailed examination uncovered substantial and noteworthy bloodstains not only under the carpet, but in the whole house.
Obvious tampering had occurred in that bedroom, with a new carpet being laid that wasn't tacked to the floor.
We tore the carpet up, removed a piece of wood, and saw a large blood pattern.
The extent of these stains left no room for doubt. Further, the investigators stumbled upon 2 bullets which were concealed beneath the bedroom flooring, solidifying their evidence that Doug had met a violent end there at the house. By employing luminol, a substance that detects the presence of blood, they made another startling discovery, a lengthy blood trail which was leading from the bedroom to the basement. Their investigation took an even more chilling turn when they examined Candace's van, where they uncovered even more bloodstains suspected to have come from Doug. Based on their investigation, the police concluded that Doug had been shot inside the bedroom and subsequently dragged through the house before being placed into the van. Considering his sizable stature at 220 pounds, it was evident that the task of moving him would have required the involvement of at least 2 individuals.
Doug's a big guy. He's well over 200 pounds. And then they've got to get rid of his body.
In light of these findings, the authorities made the decision to bring in Candace and Brandy, Doug's stepdaughter, to the police department for further questioning. Keisha was not suspected as she was away with her friends on that fateful day, which her friends corroborated. Upon reaching the police station, Candace chose to remain silent and declined to engage with the authorities. Meanwhile, in a separate room, Brandy was kept unaware of her mother's decision. The police strategically informed Brandy that her mother had confessed to the crime.
You interview this defendant and you interview that defendant, and then you learn stuff from this defendant, then you can ask this defendant about, and vice versa.
Believing this information to be true, Brandy found herself compelled to share her side of the story with the investigators. According to Brandy, her mother had awoken her in the morning of September 25, 1994, and revealed that she'd shot Doug during a heated argument. Shockingly, Candace had even sought Brandy's assistance in moving Doug's lifeless body and driving it to the nearby lake, which was Lake Thurmond. According to investigators, Brandy also revealed a startling confession from Candace. She disclosed that her mother had not only confessed to shooting Doug, but also admitted to using 2 different weapons in the act. In an attempt to dispose of the evidence, Candace had allegedly thrown the guns into a nearby river.
She'd go over a bridge and throw one gun in, and they drive a little bit farther, throw the next one in over another bridge into the water.
To further complicate matters and mislead the investigators, Candace devised a plan. She drove Doug's truck to the airport, with Brandy following closely behind in her own car. After their return home, they carefully cleaned up all the bloodstains, leaving behind no trace of the gruesome event. Justice finally caught up with Candace Overstreet on December 21, 1994, when she was officially charged with 2 counts of felony murder. The motive behind the shocking crime remained shrouded in mystery, as Candace chose to keep it hidden from the world. However, her daughter Brandy played a crucial role in the case. In exchange for her testimony against her own mother, Brandy was granted immunity, a decision that helped bring closure to the investigation. Even after the final decision, the defense team for Candace Overstreet planned to present a shocking claim that Doug had been assaulting his stepdaughters. However, prosecutors thoroughly investigated these allegations and found no evidence to support such claims. From the very beginning of the investigation and through interviews with the stepdaughters, it was clear that Doug had been a loving and caring father figure. In order to protect Doug's reputation and preserve his memory, the prosecutors made a difficult decision. They allowed Candace to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter instead. She received a 40-year prison sentence with a scheduled release date in 2034. However, unexpected news broke on December 1, 2020, when it was revealed that Candace had been granted parole. This incident once again captured public interest in 2022 as Investigation Discovery, ID, a renowned true crime network, decided to shine a spotlight on it. This particular case stands out not only for its shocking nature, but also for the unsettling involvement of family members. The recent arrival of an ID production crew in Jonesboro sparked curiosity, indicating that the network is preparing to delve deeper into the details of this tragic incident for an upcoming true crime program. This intriguing true crime story serves as a reminder of the dark secrets that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly idyllic lives. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think Candace deserved to be paroled? What could be the possible motive behind killing Doug Overstreet? We'd love to hear from you. If there's a case you'd like us to cover, don't hesitate to drop your recommendations in the comment section below. On June 8, 2012, the Vancouver Police Department in Canada received a desperate call from a 25-year-old Chinese exchange student, Lianjie Tang. The caller said that his mother, 47-year-old Lianjie Guo, who was there visiting him, went missing just one day before she was supposed to return to her home country of China. She was particularly vulnerable because of her inability to speak or even understand English, her native tongue being Cantonese. Lianjie and her husband Tang Juihe went to Vancouver, Canada 20 days prior to visit her son, Yuan Shi Tang, who was studying at Douglas College in Canada. They rented a B&B and made lots of plans for the 3 of them to spend time together as a family. Yuan was excited to show his parents around his new city. After a wonderful visit with their son, it was time for Tang Juihe and Lianjie to go back home. They had a flight scheduled to China on the afternoon of June 7, 2012. According to Yuan's statement, on the morning of their flight, Yuan made his way to the rented apartment to pick up his parents to go to the airport, but his father was still sleeping. As there was still plenty of time, Yuan decided to let him sleep in and took his mother for breakfast at a restaurant. After breakfast, they returned to the B&B, where he began loading all of their luggage into his car. He could see his mother watching him from the window as he was loading the luggage. He stated he then went to a nearby mall to make a purchase. But shockingly, when he returned, his mother was nowhere to be found. Yuan woke his father up to inquire about his mother's whereabouts. Initially, they weren't all that concerned. They assumed that Lianjie had just stepped outside for a minute and couldn't have been very far. After unsuccessfully trying to reach her by phone, they waited for some time, expecting her to come back. After a few hours, when she did not show up, they went to look for her. They searched around the city for quite some time with no luck. Since the flight was for that afternoon, Yuan and his father headed to the airport, thinking she may have caught a cab there. Unfortunately, she wasn't there either. As the airport announced the boarding of their flight, Tang Juihe was torn between going back home and searching for his wife. However, Yuan reassured him that it must have been a simple mix-up and that he'd be thoroughly searching for her and send her home once she was found. Tang Juihe returned home after a 13-hour flight filled with confusion and anxiety. His wife's seat beside him remained empty. Unable to find his mother, Yuan called the police the following morning. An investigation was launched immediately in an attempt to find Lianjie. When they reached the scene, they did not find anything suspicious. However, police speculated that Lianjie was trying to illegally stay in Canada and did not want to return home. However, this theory was filled with holes. Yuan's family ran a very successful furniture transport business, making them very well off. They had customers across the world, including the US, Europe, and Southeast Asia. While Tang Juihe visited his son often during business trips, Lianjie was visiting Vancouver for the first time. She had no history of any addiction, mental instability, affairs, or known enemies. There was really no reason for her to want to illegally stay in Canada. This theory was eventually thrown out when Lianjie's belongings, including her money, passport, and handbag, were discovered in Yuan's car. Fearing that she may have been abducted by someone, Yuan set out on a mission to find his mother. He handed out flyers with his mother's picture and details. He also gave interviews and held press conferences to spread awareness about his mother's disappearance in hopes of getting significant information. His father soon returned to Vancouver to assist in the investigation and search for his wife. The public, especially the Chinese community, was moved by the story of the father and son who were desperate to find their loved one. Many locals volunteered in the search efforts. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation, but for days, the search yielded no results. There were no ransom calls, which weakened the theory of kidnapping. At this point, when several days had passed with no new leads, cops were considering a much more sinister outcome. As a last resort, police began to look at this case from a different angle. They started looking closely at the family members. As they dug deeper, a strange piece of information caught their attention. Oddly, Yuan had rented an apartment in the same B&B in which his parents were staying, but failed to ever mention this to authorities. All this time, police believed Yuan was living in his own apartment and came to visit with his parents from time to time during their stay. Now it looked as though he was staying just next door to them the entire time. When police questioned Yuan regarding this, he simply said, "You didn't ask me. I didn't say." Upon further questioning as to why he rented a room in the B&B when he already had a rented apartment nearby, he justified it by saying he intended to spend as much time as possible with his parents. Although this bit of information did not prove that Yuan had anything to do with his mother's disappearance, his nonchalant attitude was enough to raise suspicion. Investigators also noticed that Yuan was also trying to downplay his English-speaking skills, avoiding some questions along the way, which also seems strange considering his 6 years of study in Canada. At this time, investigators started to look at Yuan as a person of interest. There was another anomaly in his story. He first told the police that his mother was alone and went missing from the B&B, but later changed his story and said they went to have breakfast and from there she went missing. He again changed his story later and said she was in his apartment and disappeared from there. Shocked by Yuan's lies, Tang Juihe asked him why he would do such a thing. Yuan told him that he did this to save his landlord from legal trouble since his landlord illegally divided the rent and had done him a favor by not calling the cops into his apartment. Though the excuse sounded lame, Tang Juihe wanted to put all his efforts into finding his wife instead of arguing with his son. But police started digging deeper for clues. They interrogated the tenants in the B&B in Richmond, Vancouver, and they all said that the family got along really well. They hit a dead end, unable to gather any evidence. 2 weeks later, in a press conference, Tang Juihe and Yuan said that although they could not rule out the possibility that something bad had happened, they were hopeful that Lianjie was safe and sound and would be reunited with them soon. At that point, investigators were leaning toward homicide rather than a disappearance. With hopes of finding remains or any evidence, they beefed up their manpower and began sweeping the nearby wooded areas, but to no avail. Despite all efforts, there was practically no progress in the case. As the business back in China was falling apart, Tang Juihe had no option but to return home. Once again, he was relying on his son to keep the search for his mother alive, which Yuan promised him he would do, before persuading his father to go back. On July 20, 2012, Lianjie's case was formally handed over to Canada's Integrated Homicide Investigation Unit. Detectives from IHIU believed from the start that Lianjie's family members were involved in her disappearance and possible homicide. However, they were unsure whether it was Tang Juihe or Yuan Ji Tang who was the culprit. Looking at the inconsistencies in Yuan's statements, IHIU detectives zeroed in on him. When they went to search the B&B, they found traces of blood on the ceiling, walls, closet, and nightstand in the room that Yuan was previously staying in. They also found a massive spot of dried blood on the bed. The blood was taken into the lab for testing, but couldn't be determined who it belonged to. As the blood evidence alone wasn't enough, Yuan couldn't be apprehended. Detectives also wanted to search Yuan's apartment, but they did not have enough to get a search warrant, and Yuan refused to let them in without one. July 20, 2012 marked 1.5 months from Lianjie's disappearance. On the same day, police received a call regarding the finding of a suitcase containing human remains on the beach near Harwood Island, a 6-hour drive from Vancouver. When cops reached the scene, they discovered the corpse of a middle-aged Asian woman. Looking at her clothes, police immediately thought of the missing Lianjie Guo. An autopsy later confirmed this. The results suggested that she died from multiple blows to her head. In her spine, 5 steel nails marked with Chinese words were found, which was consistent with the characteristics of Lianjie, as she had spinal surgery recently. When genetic tests were performed, the corpse was officially identified as 47-year-old Lianjie Guo. Unfortunately, there was no surveillance cameras in the areas where her body was found, and therefore no way to know who left the suitcase on the beach. Meanwhile, RCMP took over the case and strategized to go undercover. They neither went public with the discovery nor did they inform Yuan. At the start of August 2012, an undercover female police officer of Chinese descent contacted Yuan and said she had some information about his mother. The Cantonese-speaking officer met Yuan at a local Starbucks and informed him that she had found his mother's body inside a suitcase by the sea, but she hadn't informed the police. She was willing to get rid of it if Yuan paid up. Although Yuan denied any connection to his mother's death and wanted to get away, the officer further insisted that she was going to give him 2 days to think about it. If not, she was going to the police. Yuan called her up that night to accede to her demands. In the next meeting, she introduced him to 2 more undercover cops who told him that getting rid of a body was easy enough for them, provided he gave them money. They claimed that one of their team members was dying from cancer and could be the fall guy if all the details of the murder were supplied to them. But Yuan had no money to give them, so he made a shocking proposal. He said if they killed his father, he'd inherit everything, and then he could pay them. The undercover cops agreed to his plan as well, but demanded to know the details. Yuan fell for this well-planned trap and began to tell them the entire story. Yuan was the only son of the couple, Tang Juihe and Lianjie Guo from Foshan. They ran a successful business with an annual turnover of 10 million yen. Lianjie's strong character was an asset to the business. However, she also had a need to control things, especially when it came to her son. She was what could be called a tiger mom. Every detail of Yuan's life, be it career planning or love life, was scrutinized by Lianjie. She was responsible for Yuan's breakup with his high school sweetheart, as she had an ordinary family background. Lianjie controlled the family's wealth, and she kept a tight rein on Yuan's pocket money. In 2006, then 19-year-old Yuan was sent to Canada by his parents against his will to pursue a higher education. He was to study hotel management at Douglas Community College so that he might build his own identity in Canada and extend the family business. Yuan felt lonely in a foreign country with no desire to pursue business and feeling oppressed by his mother's control. Yuan felt manipulated and coerced by their emotional abuse, and even his classmates complained about his mother. Yuan started lying to his parents, using various pretexts to obtain money, which he would spend on gambling or partying instead of studying for his degree. His grades were very poor and not suitable to pursue further education. To pay for his expenses, he worked part-time in the kitchen of a Chinese restaurant in Vancouver, despite having a student visa that did not allow him to work in Canada. He earned only $850 per month. Meanwhile, his family in China were completely unaware of his activities. In 2011, he returned to China to spend the holidays with his family. This time, he met a girl. In a very short time span, he proposed to her. His mother objected to the marriage and found a more suitable girl for him to marry, according to her standards. This upset him. After graduation, most of his classmates returned to China, and his circle of friends became smaller. He longed to return to China to reunite with his fiancée. He explained to his father that he felt imprisoned in Canada, but his father urged him to push further. His fiancée, meanwhile, became pregnant with what he believed was his child, but then underwent an abortion. This further pushed him toward the edge. In May of 2012, his parents visited him in Canada. He rented 2 B&B rooms in Richmond, one for himself and one for his parents. He explained that they could not stay at his place because it was a shared apartment. He also rented a car, claiming that he bought it. He showed his parents around Vancouver, but even then, tensions between them were building. He wanted to be free of them, free to do as he pleased with his life. At some point, Yuan found a hammer in the B&B toolbox and stashed it inside his backpack. On the morning of June 7th, upon realizing that his father had not yet woken up, Yuan spread some coins on his bed and called his mother to his room on the pretext of helping him clean it up. When Lianjie knelt to clean it, he hit her on the head with the hammer. When she started struggling, he covered her head with a sheet and struck twice more to ensure she was dead. After killing his mother, his mind raced. He wondered whether he should kill his father too. However, after a few minutes, he decided not to go through with it, fearing that suspicion could fall on him if the two of them disappeared at the same time. After convincing his father to return to China, Yuan returned to the B&B to clean up his mess. After getting rid of the evidence, it was time for Yuan to get into the role of the good son. Yuan put up the facade of a concerned son and reported her missing. After he was done telling his story to the undercover officers, he reenacted the whole incident, not knowing his performance was being recorded. His secret was about to blow up in his face. At this point, investigators had more evidence than they could have ever expected. Yet they decided to take it slow and gather more evidence against Yuan to corroborate his story. It did not take long to track down the rented car with traces of blood inside. They also found evidence of burn stains and blood from the storage room of Yuan's apartment. On September 7, 2012, Yuan Tang was formally arrested for the murder of his mother, exactly 3 months after her disappearance. In addition to the murder charge, he faced additional charges of plotting to kill his father. Although he tried to deny everything, he eventually confessed once all the evidence was presented before him, including the video evidence he had unknowingly given undercover agents. Life turned upside down for Tang Juihe in the blink of an eye when the news broke in China about Yuan's arrest, which prompted his immediate return to Canada. He couldn't believe that his son was capable of murdering his own mother. Yuan, on the other hand, showed no remorse. He went on to say that he had no regrets about what he did. "She's been holding me back, not just controlling me a little. These are my parents and will control me for life. People are going to die. It doesn't matter if it's sooner or later." It was later discovered that Yuan had been planning to kill his parents for a long time. He waited for them to come to Canada because this country had no death penalty. He was also skeptical if Canadian police would be capable enough to solve a crime so twisted. As it turned out, he overestimated his intellect as much as he underestimated Canadian law enforcement. Shockingly, despite Yuan's horrific deeds and plotting, Tang Juihe stood by his son during the trial. He not only forgave him, but invested a lot of his fortune in Yuan's legal aid. His reasoning? He already lost his wife and couldn't afford to lose his only son, too, despite all of his wrongdoings. In one of many jail visits with Yuan, he stated, "No matter how wrong you are, I will forgive you. Your mother is gone. If you die, I don't want to live." Somehow, Tang Juihe was certain that his wife would understand his reasoning while watching over them from heaven. In court, while testifying as a prosecution witness, he begged for leniency for his son, saying that Yuan was a good man before their strict parenting ruined everything. However, the court seemed to differ, as they found him guilty after a lengthy trial. Finally, on February 2, 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada handed down the sentence of life in prison to Yuan Shi Tang for the second-degree murder of his mother and attempted murder of his father, with parole eligibility after 17 years. This complex case of control and betrayal remains one of the most controversial and disheartening in recent Canadian history. In the end, the culprit faced justice, but a family was forever destroyed. On June 14, 2021, a courtroom in Los Angeles, California was filled with silence as an elderly defendant was wheeled in on a wheelchair, looking weak and fragile. Despite his frail appearance, the accusations against him were grave. This man was accused of committing horrifying crimes over many years, allegedly murdering multiple people. Prosecutors claimed that his wealth and influential status had allowed him to escape justice for a long time. However, now he was finally facing the charges, even though he was already close to death. It raises an important question. What serious crimes did he commit that led him to face the consequences until his last breath? Robert Durst, a native of New York City, was born on April 12, 1943. Growing up in Scarsdale, he was part of the prominent Durst family, known for their real estate empire. His father, Seymour Durst, was a well-known real estate magnate, and his mother, Bernice Herstein, played a significant role in their family's life. Alongside his three younger siblings, Douglas, Tommy, and Wendy, Robert experienced typical sibling rivalry with Douglas, which led them to attend counseling sessions. Interestingly, a psychiatrist's report of 10-year-old Robert from 1953 mentioned intriguing phrases like personality decomposition and the potential of even schizophrenia, which is a mental disorder characterized by disconnection from reality, including hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking and behavior. Robert attended Scarsdale High School, where he was known to be a loner among his classmates. After graduating, he pursued a bachelor's degree in economics at Lehigh University, where he actively participated in the varsity lacrosse team and served as the business manager for the student newspaper, The Brown and White. In 1965, he completed his undergraduate studies. Following that, he ventured onto a doctoral program at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. During his time there, he met Susan Berman, who happened to be the daughter of a mobster. She was an aspiring writer who quickly became his close friend. However, Robert made the decision to withdraw from the program and return to New York in 1969. In autumn of 1971, Robert Durst crossed paths with Kathleen "Kathy" McCormick, an 18-year-old dental hygienist residing in one of the buildings in New York owned by the Durst organization. They first met when Robert went to collect the rent. Kathy, a recent high school graduate who came from a lower-middle-class modest Irish family on Long Island, had just arrived in New York City. With her sparkling beauty and strong work ethic, Kathy captivated Robert from the start. Despite Robert's reserved demeanor, Kathy found him to be a sweet and sensitive person. In the early 1970s, Robert arrived in Vermont and ventured into the health food business and opened a store called All Good Things in Vermont. Surprisingly, after only 2 dates, Robert invited Kathy to move in with them at his home near the store. A year later, on his 30th birthday on April 12, 1973, the two decided to get married.
My very first impression of Kathy and Bobby when I met them was that they were in love. There was no two ways about it. They were in love.
Their marriage started off as a loving one. Despite their significant age difference of 10 years and coming from contrasting backgrounds, Robert and Kelly found themselves entangled in a relationship. Robert, accustomed to wealth and privilege, and Kathy, hailing from an Irish Catholic family, seemed to be from two different worlds. However, Kathy was captivated by the allure and lifestyle that came with being associated with the Durst name. In 1973, under pressure from his father, Robert decided to close his health food store and use the money to purchase a cottage near New York City in South Salem. He moved in with Kathy in the house he bought, but that's when their relationship took a noticeable turn. Kathy witnessed a significant change in Robert's behavior as he transformed into a completely different person from the man she'd fallen in love with in Vermont.
These experiences with her family were kind of like Bob meets the average American family.
Well, more than meet, Bob is forced to spend time with the average American family. Bob is supposed to be polite and cooperative and pleasant and engage in the same conversations that they are, and I just couldn't do that. As we're going back in the car, Kathy is crying and saying, they're all good people. They treated us with utmost respect. You can just put up with it for 2 hours.
Did you say I'll try?
I wouldn't talk about it.
Initially, Robert enjoyed showcasing Kathy at high-profile events and introducing her to his glamorous world. However, over time, Robert's affection towards Kathy grew colder, and she found herself in an increasingly miserable situation. Kathy occasionally hinted at Robert's anger issues to her friends, saying how it started with yelling and eventually escalated to physical abuse. Over time, these hints escalated into unmistakable signs of a profoundly troubled relationship.
I was the dominant one in the relationship. I was making all the decisions, calling all the shots, as she would say. And, she went along with that for a while, and she just got tired of it. She said she wants her independence. She doesn't want me to be controlling her all the time.
Kathy had kept several diaries where she documented the hardships she endured in their marriage. Despite being a wealthy millionaire, Robert was excessively frugal and closely monitored Kathy's spending. People wondered why Kathy, a socialite married to a millionaire, was working so hard to become a doctor in medical school. She jokingly explained that it was her own choice and that she wanted to establish a career for herself. The reality was that becoming a doctor would provide her with financial independence, allowing her to have control over her own money and to spend or save it as needed. As the marriage progressed, Robert delivered a shocking blow to Kathy. He revealed that he had no desire to have children. This revelation left Kathy heartbroken, and she channeled her sadness into her studies. However, their relationship suffered a deep fracture that could never quite heal. In 1976, Kathy found herself pregnant, which triggered Durst's fury. He accused her of intentionally becoming pregnant and demanded that she undergo an abortion. With threats of divorce hanging over her, Kathy reluctantly went through with the procedure. Little did she know that this heartbreaking decision would send her spiraling into a whirlwind of grief and despair.
Kathy first started changing from the Kathy I met when I made her get an abortion.
February of '76. I found out I was pregnant. We used birth control and had at one time said if I was to become pregnant, I would have an abortion. The reality of the situation, however, was problematic for me.
I said, I told you from the beginning I didn't want children. You agreed that we wouldn't have children. Now you're telling me you're pregnant, which, you're in charge of that stuff, not me. And you want to keep the baby. Well, you keep the baby, you're going to get divorced from me. Period.
You sound like you were pretty adamant about it. And
I was strictly adamant. I just didn't want kids around. I didn't want to raise children. Somehow I thought it would be a jinx.
During that time, Kathy made a shocking discovery. She found hidden Polaroid pictures of their medicine cabinets and closets. When confronted, Durst admitted to bringing other women into their home, rearranging things to show that he lived alone, and using the photos to again place the things back where they'd been to cover his tracks. This revelation deepened the rift in their relationship, with Kathy bearing the brunt of the suffering alone. In the early months of 1982, 29-year-old Kathy was near the end of her medical studies at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, pursuing her dream of becoming a pediatrician. However, this was also a time filled with turmoil and pain. She sought medical attention for the visible bruises on her face and sought treatment at a Bronx hospital. She also revealed to a trusted friend that these injuries were inflicted by Durst, her husband, when she confronted him about his affair with Prudence Farrow, a well-known transcendental meditation guru and the sister of actress Mia Farrow, who inspired the song Dear Prudence. The combination of the demanding pressures of medical school and the constant cycle of physical and emotional abuse took a heavy toll on Kathy. She turned to excessive drinking and drugs as a means of coping with the pain. She barely slept or ate, and her friends noticed that her once vibrant and lively demeanor faded away, leaving her detached and anxious. Kathy finally realized that her marriage was beyond repair and decided to ask Robert for an official divorce in January 1982. She knew that her wealthy and violent husband would do anything to protect his money. Kathy offered him a fair settlement of $250,000, but Robert refused. In retaliation, he canceled several of her bank accounts and credit cards and also threatened to ruin her financially. This would have jeopardized Kathy's dreams of completing medical school just months away from graduation. Faced with these challenges, Kathy had to back down, and they continued with their unhappy arrangement. It became clear that Robert was more interested in controlling Kathy than anything else. Kathy only needed to endure a little longer before she could finally escape from Robert's abuse forever. Sadly, Kathy would never have the chance to reach that moment. On the evening of January 31st, 1982, Kathy attended a party hosted by her friend Gilberto Nejami. She appeared disheveled and was not acting like her usual self. Instead of her usual stylish attire, Kathy wore something casual and seemed visibly upset. Later that night, Robert called Nejami's house looking for Kathy. After a brief phone conversation, Kathy announced that she was leaving. Before walking out the door, she turned to Nejami and made a chilling statement. She asked Nejami to promise that if anything ever happened to her, she'd make sure her husband Robert was investigated. Nejami didn't fully understand the seriousness of Kathy's words at the time, but promised Kathy that her request would be fulfilled. Kathy got into her car and drove away, and it would be the last time Nejami saw her. The next day, on February 1st, 1982, when Kathy failed to meet Nejami at a pub called the Lionsgate in Manhattan as planned, Nejami grew concerned. This was highly unusual behavior for Kathy, so Nejami began reaching out to their mutual friends to see if anyone had heard from her. Nejami also called Robert, but he claimed he hadn't seen Kathy since the night of the party and was trying to contact her himself. After a few days went by without any news from Kathy, on February 5th, 1982, Robert decided to go to the New York Police Department and reported her as missing. Detective Michael Struck was the one who listened to Robert's report and talked to him about it. According to Robert, things got heated between him and Kathy that night on January 31st, 1982, and she insisted on going to their Manhattan apartment instead of staying with them at the house. In a huff, Robert drove her to the Katona train station, where she planned to catch the 9:15 p.m. train to Manhattan. The detectives found it strange that Robert had waited so long before reporting his wife missing. When they questioned him about it, he remained surprisingly calm and explained that Kathy often spent days away from home due to her work and studies at the hospital. He didn't seem bothered at all by her absence. What made things even more peculiar was that he quickly went to the press and offered a reward of $100,000 for any information that could help find Kathy. Later on, he said there was a mistake in the original article and reduced the reward amount to $15,000. Because Robert was well known, both his wife's disappearance and his own actions gained a lot of attention from the media. At this point, Robert's longtime friend, Susan Berman, stepped in and became his unofficial spokesperson. She made statements and answered questions on his behalf. During the initial investigation, both the doorman and the building superintendent at Kathy's apartment on Riverside Drive in Manhattan claimed to have seen Kathy there on February 1st, 1982, the day after she was last seen. However, the doorman admitted that he only saw her from a distance and from behind, so he couldn't be sure it was her. Also, the dean from her college confirmed that on February 1st, 1982, Kathy had called him to inform him she was sick and was having gastric problem, so she wouldn't be able to attend classes for a few days. What made things even more mysterious was that only 3 weeks after Robert reported Kathy missing, the building superintendent discovered her belongings in the building's trash compactor. Kathy's friends couldn't sit still and wait any longer, so they took matters into their own hands. In March 1982, they broke into Kathy and Robert's South Salem home, hoping to find any sign of her or any clue about where she might be. But what they found was shocking. The house was a complete mess, as if it had been turned upside down. Kathy's mail had been torn open, and her belongings were carelessly thrown into the garbage. Her clothes, medical school books, and even her jewelry had been discarded.
I went through his garbage, and I found that he was throwing her things out right away, within 5 weeks at least. of her disappearance. He knew she wasn't coming back.
As they continued their search, they stumbled upon an itinerary that seemed to be written by Robert himself. This discovery added another layer of intrigue to the already puzzling situation. In the itinerary, Robert provided a detailed account of everything he did on the night Kathy went missing and the following days.
A small trash can by the bed. And I went in, picked it out, and there it was. I said, oh boy, that just sent chills down my spine.
The handwritten note contains the words town dump, bridge, dig, boat, and what Robert Durst has admitted was his own handwriting.
It sounded like a wish list of what you do with a body to me.
So what'd you do with this letter once you found it?
Gave it to the police. They didn't want it.
Didn't want it.
They did not want it.
The friends shared this information with the lead detective working on the case, who found it unusual because innocent people typically don't feel the need to write down such a precise and minute-by-minute recounting of their activities. While the New York police investigated leads and questioned Robert, it didn't remain unnoticed that higher-ranking officials were not pushing hard to solve the case. The investigation, which had only been going on for a few weeks, had already started to slow down. Usually, high-profile cases like this attract significant attention and pressure on the detectives, but that wasn't happening in this case. It seemed that the Durst family showed little concern about Kathy's disappearance and didn't cooperate with law enforcement. Robert himself refused interviews with the police, polygraph tests, and even answering basic questions, although he did give several interviews to reporters. Initially, Robert appeared to be a concerned and sympathetic husband, but his attitude soon changed to annoyance, and he began to speak negatively about Kathy. He told the press that he thought Kathy had left him and was planning to run away with another man. Unfortunately, there was already limited evidence in Kathy's disappearance, and it seemed like the available evidence was ignored by law enforcement, possibly due to Robert's wealth and influence. As a result, despite the initial attention and urgency, the case quickly went cold, and Kathy's disappearance became just another file in a storage locker for unsolved cases. After Kathy's disappearance, Robert distanced himself from New York and maintained a small circle of friends, primarily including Susan Berman and a few others. Between 1990 and 2000, Robert attempted to start fresh. He sold the house he shared with Kathy in South Salem, and without Kathy's family knowing, he filed for divorce on the grounds of spousal abandonment. Despite being next in line to take over his father's company, his father, Seymour, appointed his younger brother Douglas to the position in 1994. This caused Robert to accuse his brother of stealing the company from him, leading to a rift within the family. In 1999, 17 years after her disappearance, the New York police quietly reopened Kathy's missing persons case after new detectives discovered significant mistakes made during the initial investigation. Their first suspicion was towards Robert. After this, they obtained a search warrant and searched Robert's former South Salem home and the nearby Truesdale Lake. But to their disappointment, they found nothing. It was during this period that Susan Berman, Robert's closest friend, found herself in a difficult financial situation. She was on the verge of being evicted from her home and had no money left. Desperate for help, she tried to reach out to Robert, but couldn't get through to him directly. Instead, she left a voicemail on a phone number he maintained. Several months later, in August 2000, a surprising gift arrived from Robert. He sent her 2 checks, each worth $25,000, which Susan used to pay off her debts. Little did they know, this act of generosity would be the catalyst for a series of unexpected events that were about to unfold. In December 2000, Susan Berman was living by herself in Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles. She worked as a journalist and author and had a fascinating background to share. Susan wrote about her family connections to reputed gangsters, especially her father, David "Davy" Berman, who was a mob boss in Las Vegas.
When Susan was only 12, her father died on the operating table. He was in the hospital for routine surgery. And this was a huge blow to Susan, and it really marked her for the rest of her life.
Susan and Robert quickly became close friends after meeting as students at UCLA when Susan was 22 years old. They shared a bond through their traumatic experiences. Susan's father died during surgery, and her mother passed away from a drug overdose. Similarly, Robert believed his mother had taken her own life, jumping off the roof of their home. Susan saw Robert as the younger brother she never had and became very protective of him. When Susan got married in 1984, it was Robert who walked her down the aisle. When Kathy went missing, Susan took on the role of Robert's unofficial spokesperson. relaying his statements to the public. She also served as his alibi for the night Kathy disappeared. In September 2000, the Westchester District Attorney, Janine Porto, contacted Susan and informed her that they were about to reopen the Kathy Durst case after 18 years. Knowing Susan's close friendship with Robert and her role as his alibi during Kathy's disappearance, the district attorney believed she might be withholding crucial information that could help solve the case. Since Susan had never been interviewed during the initial investigation, the interview was scheduled to take place early in the new year. Surprisingly, the news of the district attorney's intention to interview Susan made headlines in New York. On December 19, 2000, Susan spoke with her friend, actress Kim Langford, and hinted at having an extraordinary story and vital information that would shake things up. Unfortunately, the day to reveal that information never came.
MSD operator 348. Yes, hi. I live in Bennett Canyon, and my next door neighbor, one of our other neighbors, found her dog on the street yesterday. Her car is in the driveway. She's not answering her door. There's packages on her doorstep. She's not answering her phone. Her back door is wide open. So I don't know what's going on.
On December 24, 2000, police found Susan Berman's lifeless body lying on the floor in a back bedroom of her house, which was located at 1527 Benedict Canyon Drive in Beverly Hills. She'd been shot at close range with a single 9mm bullet hitting the back of her head, suggesting an execution-style killing. The police initially suspected that Susan's loose association with organized crime, given her father's notorious reputation as a mobster, may have played a role in her murder. Susan had openly discussed her family ties and even started writing about them, which may have drawn unwanted attention from certain individuals. The manner of her death, resembling a mafia-style execution with a single shot to the back of the head, seemed to support this theory. However, just a few days into the investigation, this theory was discarded as the Beverly Hills Police Department received an anonymous letter. The letter was written in block letters, and interestingly, the word Beverly was misspelled. Inside the envelope was a white piece of paper with Susan's address written on it and the word cadaver written below. What puzzled the investigators was that the letter had been sent on December 23, 2000, before the news of Susan's murder became public. This was unusual because a mobster would not typically send a letter to the police revealing the location of a body. It suggested that the person responsible for her death may have had a connection to her and cared enough to ensure her body was not left undiscovered and decomposed. Despite thorough examination, no fingerprints or saliva were found on the letter. Nonetheless, the act of sending the letter strongly suggested that the crime was not related to organized crime. That's when Susan's friend Linda Ops came forward and revealed that Susan had a close relationship with Robert Durst. It was also discovered that Susan was scheduled to have an interview with District Attorney Janine Pirro regarding the disappearance of Robert's wife, Kathy, in the new year. The police found it strange that Susan was murdered just before the interview, raising suspicions about the timing and possible connections between the two events. They wondered if Susan possessed information that could have unveiled hidden mysteries. The police delved deeper into Robert Durst's activities and discovered something suspicious. They learned that he'd been in California on December 19, 2000, and had departed on a late-night flight from San Francisco to New York on December 23, 2000, the day before Susan's body was discovered. This raised questions about why he was in San Francisco. Determined to uncover the truth, the police contacted Robert Durst for an interview. Initially, he refused to give any statements, but eventually, he had no choice but to agree. The police asked him about his travels, his connection to Susan's murder, and listened to his side of the story in their pursuit of the real truth.
We know that you flew out here, San Francisco, on December 19th. I think, Bob, that you drove down to Los Angeles.
Killed Susan?
I do.
Drove back?
You know, you don't take red-eye flights very often. Did you know that?
Very infrequently.
And usually you don't buy your tickets right at the counter. Would you agree?
Usually I make reservations.
Right. On December 23rd, you end up buying that ticket at 10 at night at the counter in San Francisco. Just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm just not going to be able to answer that because I just don't.
Okay. Hard to explain.
Unusual.
Despite the interview with Robert Durst, the police were unable to gather enough solid evidence to connect him to Susan's murder. Robert didn't provide any information during the interview that could lead the police to solve the case. Without concrete proof, the authorities had no choice but to release Robert Durst. The investigation into Susan's murder hit a roadblock, leaving the police frustrated and searching for new leads to unravel the mystery. Robert decided to leave New York when he learned that Kathy's case was going to be reopened. He wanted to avoid any further questioning and investigations into the case. In April 2001, he found refuge in Galveston, Texas, where he rented a modest apartment for a mere $300 per month. However, fate had more surprises in store for him. Another unfortunate event unfolded, adding yet another twist to the already mysterious tale. On September 30th, 2001, the police in Galveston, Texas received a call from concerned parents reporting that their child had seen a man's torso floating in the water off Channel View Drive while walking in an upper-middle-class neighborhood. The police quickly arrived at the scene and discovered a headless torso of a Caucasian man. As they searched the water, they found several black trash bags floating nearby, which contained severed arms and legs, but the head was nowhere to be found. Through fingerprints taken from one of the hands, the police identified the remains as belonging to a 71-year-old man named Morris Black. Morris lived in an apartment building on 2213 Avenue K and had no contact with his family. He'd arrived in Texas in the mid-1990s and had a previous arrest in 1998 for making threats about blowing up a utility company over an electricity bill issue. People who'd met Morris in Galveston described him as a grumpy old man who was suspicious of everyone. His nomadic lifestyle made it difficult to track his timeline of events over the years. The police obtained a search warrant for Morris's apartment and discovered that it had recently been thoroughly cleaned. In the kitchen, they noticed drop cloths covering the floor, and when they moved them, they found scratches on the floor that seemed to be made by a saw or another cutting tool. Removing the laminate, they uncovered large bloodstains underneath. They spread a substance called luminol throughout the apartment, which revealed blood traces everywhere, including drag marks leading from Morris's apartment to the one across the hall. The apartment across the hall belonged to Dorothy Siner, an elderly mute woman who kept to herself and was rarely seen. Investigators obtained a search warrant for Dorothy's apartment and found blood throughout the place. Unlike Morris's apartment, this one hadn't been cleaned, and there were dried blood splatters all over. They also discovered a paring knife, a cleaver, a handsaw, and a pistol, which was suspected to be the murder weapon. One of the bags recovered from the bay was empty and had a large rip, leading officers to believe that it might have contained Morris's missing head, as it was the only body part still unaccounted for. At this point, Dorothy Siner was missing, and the police focused on locating her. They discovered that Morris had likely been killed in Dorothy's apartment and dismembered in his own apartment. This raised a puzzling question. How could an elderly woman drag a man from one place to another and dismember him? Investigators spoke to residents of the avenue, and an upstairs neighbor revealed that she'd seen a man frequently visiting Dorothy's apartment. On the night of September 29, 2001, she witnessed this man carrying a heavy trash bag and putting it into a Honda CR-V. Additionally, when the police searched the garbage cans near the avenue, they found packaging for a 4-inch paring knife, a shell casing that could potentially belong to the pistol found in Dorothy's apartment, and a receipt from a local optometrist with Robert Durst's name on it. This discovery surprised the investigators as they wondered if Robert, along with Dorothy, was somehow connected to Morris's murder. To uncover the truth, the investigators checked the national database for information on Dorothy. On October 2, 2001, they were finally able to locate her. Surprisingly, she denied living in Galveston, Texas, and revealed that she was not mute. When asked about the second suspect, Robert, she admitted knowing him from their high school days in the 1950s. However, she hadn't spoken to him in decades and had no idea why an apartment was rented under her name. This raised suspicions about Robert's involvement in Morris's murder. On October 9, 2001, a Honda CR-V matching the description of the neighbor from Avenue K was discovered, and a search of the vehicle uncovered a saw and visible blood in the trunk. Finally, at 58 years old, for the first time, Robert Durst was arrested and charged with the murder of Morris Black. It was then revealed that to hide his true identity, he assumed the persona of Dorothy Siner and pretended to be a mute woman, using the name he borrowed from his former high school friend. During his time in Galveston, he was spotted wearing women's wigs and frequently visiting the library to search for articles about himself. He was held on a hefty bail amount of $300,000, which he easily paid and secured his release from custody. Surprisingly, he had no trouble paying this amount and was granted bail. However, instead of attending his court date on October 16, 2001, he quickly left Texas and went on the run. As a result, he was declared a fugitive by failing to appear in court as scheduled. After Robert became a fugitive, a search was initiated to find him.
In the search for Robert Durst, a lawyer is asking him to surrender. Attorney Michael Kennedy made an appeal to him to turn himself in.
Robert, if you see this or hear this, please come home. You have loved ones who care about you here in New York. Your family is solidly, unifiedly behind you. The trust has the wherewithal to pay for your legal defense.
On November 30th, 2001, he was caught shoplifting at a Wegmans grocery store in Pennsylvania. When the police searched his vehicle, they discovered over $13,000 in cash, including nearly $600 in his pocket. They also found marijuana and a handgun. As a result, Robert faced charges for possessing the firearm and the shoplifting incident. He was extradited back to Texas to face more serious charges, and this time he was held in custody without the option for bail. In January 2002, Robert Durst returned to Texas to face trial for the murder of Morris Black. During his testimony, Robert claimed that on September 28, 2001, he arrived home to find Morris in his apartment, visibly angry. Even though Morris had a key to the apartment, Robert was not expecting him. Robert stated that he immediately suspected Morris of taking his stored pistol from the oven, and when he asked Morris about it, Morris allegedly stood up and pointed the gun at him. Robert asserted that in the struggle that ensued, he grabbed the pistol and both of them fell to the ground, resulting in the gun accidentally going off. Robert maintained that he never intentionally pulled the trigger, but the gunshot caused Morris's death. Robert claimed that after the incident, he tried to seek help from a neighbor, but nobody answered, so he returned to his apartment and began cleaning up the blood himself. He admitted to drinking a bottle of Jack Daniels and then proceeded to dismember Morris's body. He later disposed of the body parts by dumping them in the Galveston Bay. Robert explained that he did not go to the police because he believed they wouldn't believe his self-defense claim due to his past reputation and the suspicious circumstances. With the help of skilled defense attorneys, Robert's legal team presented evidence in court to support his case of acting in self-defense. Despite the substantial evidence, on November 11, 2003, Robert was found not guilty of Morris's death and was acquitted of the charges. The trial ended with a shocking outcome. Initially, Robert had to post a bail of $450,000 due to his past bail jumping and tampering with evidence. However, in October 2004, just as he was about to be released on parole, Pennsylvania authorities charged him with weapons possessions related to his time as a fugitive. He was released from federal prison in July 2005 and sent to Texas for parole. But Robert had trouble staying in one place. In December 2005, he was arrested for violating his parole by making unauthorized trips to Galveston. He was caught after visiting a Texas mall where he coincidentally encountered the judge who had presided over his murder trial. In February 2006, Robert was released from prison, and his parole supervision ended 9 months later. Once again, he became a free man. 4 years later, Robert's notorious actions became the subject of a movie called All Good Things, which was loosely based on his life. The film, starring Ryan Gosling and Kirsten Dunst, premiered in December 2010. It portrayed a man who killed his wife's best friend, neighbor, and dog. After watching the movie, Robert reached out to the director, Andrew Jarecki, and praised the film, but expressed his dislike for the portrayal of the dog's murder. Robert and Andrew stayed in touch over the years, and despite his lawyer's advice against it, Robert eventually agreed to be interviewed for a documentary series about his life called The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst, which was produced by HBO.
Did not tell the whole truth. Nobody tells the whole truth.
Did you have anything to do with the death of your wife?
I don't know that she's dead.
Do you think that it's possible that she's alive now?
It's possible. Not likely. I felt terrible for Susan. I was astonished that they were putting all this together, that I did it or I caused it to be done. An interview is a big risk for you. Why do you want to do an interview?
During the interview, Robert vehemently denied having any involvement in the murder of Susan or the disappearance of Kathy, firmly maintaining his innocence. Afterward, a series of interviews followed, leading to the creation of one of the most influential true crime documentary series, HBO's The Jinx, which was aired on February 8, 2015. In this series, Andrew and his team carefully examined every aspect of Robert Durst's life, starting from his childhood to his marriage with Kathy and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, as well as the murder of Susan Berman. The documentary also covered Robert's trial for the killing of Morris Black. As the documentary series progressed, an intriguing development unfolded. It began with Robert providing explanations for certain events that Andrew found suspicious. However, as the series continued, the doubts surrounding Robert grew stronger. The most significant revelation occurred during an interview with Sareb Kaufman, Susan Berman's stepson. Initially, Sareb staunchly defended Robert and believed he could never harm Susan. Even when presented with a clear motive for Robert's potential involvement, Sareb refused to entertain the possibility. However, weeks later, in March 2015, Sareb's curiosity was piqued by his conversation with Andrew, prompting him to explore some old boxes containing Susan's belongings. To everyone's astonishment, including the production team, Sareb discovered a letter sent by Robert to Susan a few months before her death. The letter, a simple white envelope with block lettering, had the word Beverly misspelled. This finding significantly impacted the investigation into Susan's murder. During this entire time, both the Beverly Hills Police Department and the New York City Police were actively searching for leads in the cases of Susan Berman and Kathy Durst. When the crew of the Jinx contacted the Beverly Hills Police Department about the letter found by Sareb, it sparked alarm as it connected to the initial investigation into Susan's murder. This newfound evidence revitalized the investigators, prompting them to fly to New York and interview individuals close to Robert during the time of Susan's murder. These interviews provided police with additional evidence, leading to the filing of murder charges against Robert Durst. He was eventually located in a hotel in New Orleans, along with a .38 caliber revolver, $40,000, a map of Cuba, a shoulder-to-head latex mask, and fake IDs and passport, from which police understood that he was planning to fly to Cuba. He was arrested by the FBI in March 2015, just a few days before the highly anticipated finale of The Jinx aired on HBO.
He's the infamous heir to one of the country's wealthiest real estate families, long suspected in connection with a pair of murders and a disappearance dating back decades. Tonight, Robert Durst is behind bars, arrested overnight in the lobby of a New Orleans hotel, accused of killing a female friend in Los Angeles 15 years ago. The investigation got a boost in recent weeks thanks to new evidence revealed in a documentary series that Durst willingly participated in. Law enforcement sources say they feared Durst, who was using a fake name, was a flight risk.
The next morning after his arrest, Robert had a court hearing where he was held on bail until an extradition hearing. In November 2016, he was moved to the Los Angeles County Jail to await trial for the murder of Susan Berman. On March 2020, Robert appeared in court for the start of his trial, which was anticipated to last for several months. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the proceedings were postponed until May 17, 2021. On May 17th, the jurors were asked if they could still be fair and impartial in the case despite the long break of 14 months. One juror was dismissed for not following the court's instructions to avoid following the trial in the news during the pandemic break. During a discussion about the content of the opening statements, the defense attorney, DeGuerin, and the prosecutor, Lewin, got into a loud argument and had to be separated by another defense attorney, David Chesnoff. They were then scolded by the judge, Mark Wyndham. On June 10, 2021, Robert Durst was found in a condition where he couldn't get up from the floor without help in prison. He was taken to the hospital, and the judge decided to send the jury home until June 14th. The prosecutor, Lewin, suspected that Robert might be pretending to be sick in order to cause a mistrial. Lewin mentioned that Robert had previously talked about faking dementia or using COVID-19 as a reason for mistrial in his phone calls from jail. After the emergency hospitalization, doctors from the jail determined that Robert was able to appear in court. On June 14, 2021, the trial resumed, and Robert, unable to dress himself, arrived in court in his wheelchair, wearing a jail uniform and covered with a large blanket. It was during this time that he was questioned about the murders. On June 28, 2021, Robert's brother Douglas took the stand as a witness for the prosecution. On September 17, 2021, the jury found Robert guilty of first-degree murder in the case of Susan Berman. This meant he could potentially receive a life sentence. He was also convicted on multiple special charges. Robert's lawyers expressed disappointment with the verdict and stated they'd explore all available options for appeal. On September 24th, Robert's legal team filed a motion requesting a new trial. Their arguments mirrored those presented during the original trial, claiming that there was no physical evidence, the credibility of prosecution witnesses were questionable, and the entire case relied on an unproven theory. On October 14, 2021, Robert received a life sentence in prison with no chance of parole for the murder of Susan Berman. The court denied Robert's request for a new trial, as there was ample evidence that pointed to his guilt in the case. On January 10, 2022, at the age of 78, Robert passed away due to a heart attack at San Joaquin General Hospital in Stockton, California. He was undergoing medical tests at the time of his death. Robert was still under the custody of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation when he died. It's frustrating to know that Robert Durst lived a long life, reaching the age of 78. That's much longer than two of his victims, which is a heartbreaking thought. John Lewin, the prosecutor in Durst's trial, expressed his thoughts on the matter, saying that Durst remained hostile, unrepentant, and without remorse until the very end. It's a reminder of the pain and suffering his victims endured. His thoughts and sympathies lie with Robert's victims. From the unresolved disappearance of his first wife, Kathy, to the shocking murders of Susan Berman and Morse Black, Durst's story has been a chilling tale of deceit and violence. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think Robert was really responsible for all the murders? Did he do it all on purpose? We'd love to hear from you. If there's a case you'd like us to cover, don't hesitate to drop your recommendations in the comment section below. In the early hours of July 7, 1985, 54-year-old Jane Anker Hylton was found beaten and stabbed to death. She was discovered in a bedroom at her employer's house, a house she moved into only the previous day, seeking refuge from a troubled marriage. Jane was discovered by two fellow housemates and her own daughter, Autumn. The murder made no sense, and the case dragged for 14 years, until two new detectives reopened the cold case in 1999. A misquote in an article led investigators to point the finger at Ricky Davis. Davis was eventually tried for the crime and convicted, all the while proclaiming his innocence. Determined not to give up, he sought help from the same justice system that put him behind bars. 15 years later, Davis was exonerated and the real killer found thanks to genetic genealogy testing and the determination of a group called the Innocence Project, who were determined to find the truth. Jane was a familiar face around El Dorado Hills, California. She was a columnist for Foothill Times. She often covered social events in and around town for the paper. Jane had 6 children whom she loved and often wrote poetry to help inspire them daily. She'd been working toward getting her real estate license and was married to Archie Hylton in 1984. However, by July 1985, their marriage started to fall apart. It was then she asked her employer, Wilma Klein, for assistance. Klein owned a fairly large home in El Dorado Hills. With her lived her daughter, Maureen Klein, and her boyfriend. Wilma's grandson, Ricky Davis, and his girlfriend, Connie Dahl, also occupied a room at the house. On July 6, 1985, Wilma welcomed Jane and her youngest daughter, 13-year-old Autumn Anker, into her home. By all accounts, it was a full house. The first night of her new life would prove to be the night her life ended. At 3:30 a.m., Ricky Davis, then 20, and his girlfriend, 19-year-old Connie Dahl, returned from a party to find Autumn lingering about outside. She told them she was out late and afraid her mother was going to be angry. All three made their way into the house. There was blood in the hallway. It was silent as they reached the first room, belonging to Maureen, Ricky's mother. On the bed was the bloodied body of Jane Hylton. She was not breathing. Maureen and her boyfriend had gone on a camping trip and were not home at the time. Ricky and Connie called 911. Paramedics and police arrived, but Jane was pronounced dead at the scene. She had suffered 29 stab wounds, was beaten and bitten on her shoulder. It was a senseless murder, and investigators began to interview those closest to Jane. Archie Hylton, Jane's estranged husband, was interviewed and provided detectives with a solid alibi and DNA. Archie had been the logical choice as he and Jane had been going through a rough patch. He, however, said that the marriage was not over and that there was no trouble between them. He was cleared and all leads went cold. Ricky Davis and Connie Dahl both told investigators they arrived home in the early morning hours and found Autumn waiting outside. When they entered the house, they found the hallway carpet bloodied. The blood trail led them to the master bedroom where they found Jane lying dead on the bloodied mattress. They speculated that an intruder may have been responsible for the murder. For 14 years, the case remained unsolved. The cold case reopened in 1999. El Dorado County Sheriff's detectives Richard Strasser and Rick Fitzgerald were tasked with the investigation. After poring over paperwork, they zoomed in on a news article. Connie Dahl, former girlfriend of Ricky Davis and housemate of Jane Hylton, had given an interview to a reporter. She was quoted saying Hylton's body was lying in bed like someone placed her there in the position she would normally sleep in. This statement seemed to contradict a muffled audio recording of a statement that Davis had previously made. Detective Fitzgerald falsely thought he heard him say the body was found on the floor. Dahl was, at the time, serving a jail sentence in Oregon on unrelated charges. Detectives brought her in for an interview and began a 3-hour-long interrogation. Initially, Dahl stuck to her original story. Over the next 18 months, though, she would be interrogated 4 times. Detectives were found to have used techniques known to increase the chances of a false confession. Dahl was systematically forced into incriminating Davis and Jane's daughter Autumn in the murder. Dahl was threatened with a charge of murder. If she cooperated, though, she'd be given a lenient sentence of manslaughter and serve only a year. Detectives Strasser and Fitzgerald told Dahl that DNA evidence was going to be used to trace the suspect. In truth, no DNA evidence was brought into the case during that period. In truth, testing had not been done on the DNA recovered from the scene. By showing her crime scene photos and using facts from the crime, such as the bite mark on Jane's shoulder, investigators fed Dahl the information they wanted to hear. Over the course of the 4 interviews, Dahl was starting to break. She began remembering facts from the crime. This in turn allowed her to fabricate and create an entirely different account of events from the night of the murder. In one interview, Dahl said that Autumn was present during the murder of Jane and was sprayed with blood. In another, she confessed that she was probably the person that bit Jane on the shoulder. Dahl would say that the murder began with an argument between Davis and Jane. She alleged that Davis wanted Autumn to join them at a party. When Jane refused, Davis erupted in a fit of anger, leading to the death of Jane. Her story kept changing to fit the facts being fed. However, she couldn't remember the weapon used for the murder or where it was eventually hidden. Dahl had implicated her ex-boyfriend Davis in the murder of Jane Hylton. He was now the prime suspect. Ricky Davis and Autumn Anker were also interviewed following the confession of Connie Dahl. Both Davis and Anker stuck to their original accounts of the crime. Detectives again lied to Davis, telling him that Anker had also implicated him in the murder. Anker told detectives she had no reason to protect Davis when they threatened her with culpability regarding the murder. Despite their interrogation techniques, detectives could not sway Davis or Anker to change their stories. They therefore used the confession of Dahl to arrest Davis. Dahl was offered a plea bargain to testify against Davis at his trial. Davis's first trial was declared a mistrial by jurors. His second, in 2005, would eventually convict him. Dahl took the stand and testified against Davis. She told the court of how she struggled with Jane and she herself accidentally bit the victim on the shoulder. She went on to say that she went outside as Davis continued the bloody assault on Hylton. Dahl said she could hear screaming, pleading, and gurgling as Davis continued the brutal attack. Based entirely on the testimony of Dahl's account of events, Davis was sentenced to 16 years in prison for the second-degree murder of Jane Hylton. Dahl received a lesser charge of manslaughter and received a year-long sentence at the county jail. Dahl, though, would eventually die from a drug overdose in 2014. Meanwhile, Davis was not going down without a fight. He maintained his innocence and in 2006 made contact with the Northern California Innocence Project. He asked if they could help him prove that he was wrongly convicted. The NCIP was founded in 2001 by Kathleen Rodolphe and Linda Starr. The project began after legislation offered convicted inmates to seek DNA testing to prove their innocence. It's a nonprofit clinical program of Santa Clara University's School of Law. After Davis made contact with the NCIP in 2006, his case was put through a thorough re-examination. Cooperation between the NCIP and the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office allowed for the DNA recovered from the crime scene to be retested post-conviction. Evidence from the crime scene included Hylton's nightgown and biological material found under her fingernails. The results revealed an unknown male DNA profile. DNA from Hylton's fingernails and nightgown were both found to be from the same source. Test results eliminated Davis, Dahl, and Anker. This proved Dahl's testimony was contradictory to the physical evidence and therefore had to have been fabricated. The DNA also proved Archie Hylton innocent. Unfortunately, he had passed away by the time results were released. The DNA profile found was entered into the FBI Combined Index DNA system, CODIS, but no matches were found. Although the evidence seemed to prove Davis's consistent claim of innocence correct, there were some hurdles that still needed to be jumped. The NCIP successfully argued that had the DNA results been presented to the jury during Davis's trial, the outcome would be different. However, until January 2017, the California standard required that new evidence point unerringly to innocence. It was considered an almost unattainable standard. In 2015, a false confession expert, Richard Leo, reviewed transcripts of Dahl's interrogations. Leo concluded that the methods used by detectives during the interrogation of Dahl were designed to pressure and persuade Dahl to adopt an account that matched the detectives' pre-existing beliefs about how and why the murder of Jane Hylton occurred. In 2016, though, the NCIP co-sponsored Senate Bill 1134. This bill allowed wrongfully convicted inmates, like Davis, to prove that new evidence would likely have been compelling to a jury. NCIP attorney Melissa O'Connell filed a petition for a new trial based on the new DNA evidence testing. Championed by former California State Senator Mark Leno, the bill was passed in January 2017, putting California's standard in line with that of 43 other states. In 2019, Superior Court Judge Kenneth Malikian vacated Davis's 2005 conviction and ordered a new trial. Initially set to start in fall of 2019, however, the judge announced the trial would take place in April 2020, citing the defense attorney's health as the catalyst for change in date. However, the fate of the trial was about to change once again. Advancements in DNA testing led to Davis becoming the first convicted person in California and the second in the United States to be exonerated for a crime. Genetic genealogy is a fairly new DNA testing concept. It involves taking DNA evidence from a crime scene and sending them to genetic companies. These companies then search family tree databases to find a potential match. In February 2020, DNA evidence matched to a man considered an unlikely suspect. El Dorado County Attorney Vern Pearson announced in February 2020 that a new suspect had been identified as the man linked to the DNA evidence found on Jane Hylton's body. Following the arrest, many people spoke to the media about the man they knew as Michael Green. Green was a longtime resident of Roseville, California. He graduated from Oakmount High School in 1986. He was described as an easygoing, kind person, even-tempered, and even super chill. One classmate who wanted to remain anonymous could not understand why Green would go to El Dorado Hills and brutally murder a woman. According to reports, Green was 17 years old at the time of Hylton's murder. On the night of July 6, 1985, the victim's daughter Autumn met Green and two of his friends, Calvin and Stephen. They hung out together at the park when Autumn decided to go home and have a shower before returning. Allegedly, Autumn told her mother she was going to another friend's house for the evening. Instead, she returned to the park to join the boys. What happened next is pure speculation. Investigators believe that during this time, Green broke into the house and was confronted by Jane. In a struggle to get away, Green may have attacked her in a frenzy. Following the attack, Jane's body was discovered by Davis, Dahl, and Autumn when they returned home. Green had no criminal convictions either before or after the murder. It seems he had led a normal life until DNA linked him to the gruesome crime. The other two boys who were with Green were tracked down shortly after his arrest. Calvin, unfortunately, had died some time ago. Stephen, however, was found and interviewed the day after the arrest. He was being treated as a witness and not a participant. Green was arrested on February 11, 2020. Since Green was a teenager at the time of the murder, he made his first appearance at a juvenile court on February 19, 2020. District Attorney Vern Pearson said that, procedurally, the court has to go through some steps on the juvenile side of it. Following this, Green was granted a transfer so that he could be tried as an adult. He waited 2.5 years before he would be tried in court. Green pleaded no contest on July 29, 2022. This plea means Green gave up his right to a jury trial. A jury trial meant he was to face a charge of first-degree murder. He also gave up his chance to challenge the plea or the consequences of his decision. His sentencing date was set for September 27, 2022, to be presided over by Judge Suzanne Kingsbury. At sentencing, Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, a professor in psychological science education, was called in on educational capacity to explain to the court the development of an adolescent. Kaufman's research explained the varying development needs of adolescents with regard to emotional and cognitive development. The late adolescent stage allowed an individual to understand right from wrong, yet at the same time, they're also functioning under diminished capacity for impulse control. The defense called several witnesses from Green's childhood, some who even maintained relationships with him into adulthood. Each witness was asked if their opinion had changed of him since the knowledge of his confession. All witnesses agreed they'd been shocked to discover that he was responsible for the murder of Hylton. Individuals who knew him in varying capacities described him as jovial, popular, funny, and loving. These words were used to describe him before and after the murder. Green's ex-wife, Karen Green, said, "There's just not a bad bone in Mike." After witness statements were given, each of Jane Hylton's children presented their victim impact statements. They all described the unforgivable loss that Green inflicted upon their family. "The why it happened and how different my life could have been will haunt me forever," said Heather Purvis McConnell, one of Jane's daughters. Ardith Brandon, Hylton's fourth child, said, "I loved my mother, and I assume Michael loves his mother too. I want to know what he would feel or what he would say to the person who stabbed your mother 29 times. What would you do if you received an early morning call to tell you your mother is dead?" The court listened to her description of the feeling of gathering her mother's belongings from the house in which she was killed. Ardith finished with a powerful declaration. "We will always have something in common, regretting the stupid decision you made 37 years ago." Hylton's son Ian echoed his sister's sentiments. He went on to explain the uncertainty the family faced and the recurring nightmares they suffered, especially after the crooked finger of blame was pointed at his own sister, Autumn. He broke down in tears as he ended with an almost inaudible remark. "All the words we say will never bring my mother back." Autumn was the last to speak. Her statement showed true agony as she recounted the cloud of suspicion she'd lived under for the last 2 decades. Recounting the day 2 crew-cut thick-mustached detectives came into her house telling her they found the people responsible for her mother's death, she was then repeatedly accused of biting her mother and helping move her body from the floor to the bed. Autumn went on to say that if she hadn't said the word lawyer at that point, she did not know how much further the intimidation tactics of the investigators could have gone. Afterwards, Deputy District Attorney Jay Linden read a statement on behalf of the family. In the statement, he asked Green what made him end Jane's life in such a brutal manner. "You beat her. She had numerous wounds around her head and face. By your own words, you kicked her jaw. You bit her on the shoulder, why was that? Lyndon continued to read the statement that expressed how Green didn't just murder Jane, he destroyed numerous lives in the process. Lyndon then asked Green if he'd given any thought about Jane and who she was. He pointed out her achievements and the love she had for each of her children. In closing arguments, Margaret Husher, Green's defense attorney, stressed the idea that he was unable to stop himself. She emphasized that he did not know what he was doing was wrong, as he was an adolescent at the time. This argument was based on the testimony of expert witness Dr. Kaufman. She asked that the court show mercy as she read off the multiple penal codes and rules of the court. Judge Kingsbury interjected by saying, "The court is not going to put him on probation," effectively ending any further comment from the defense. In response, Lyndon thanked the court and said the application for probation was offensive. He said, "It was a smack to this family who had endured this for decades." Lyndon stated that he already got away with murder for 37 years. Placing him on probation allowed him to get away with more. Judge Kingsbury said she had heard a multitude of arguments about murder cases surrounding adolescent development. She remarked that after her 26 years on the bench, Jane Hylton's murder was by far the most brutal. Before passing her sentence, Kingsbury asked the family for their forgiveness for the trauma they had suffered, although she was not originally assigned the case. She also hoped they would heal from the pain, as it would have been their mother's wish. Kingsbury then encouraged Green to use all resources at his disposal in the California Department of Rehabilitation. "You're the key to the questions these people have. Doing that could ultimately help you with your outcome as it relates to parole," said Kingsbury. In closing, Kingsbury pointed out that she had heard from his friends that there's a great side to him and that he has much to offer. She also said he was young enough to be released and live a productive life. Green was sentenced to 15 years to life and remanded to the El Dorado County Jail. He will then be transferred to the California Department of Rehabilitation. Restitution will be decided after further consideration by the court. Davis was released on February 13, 2020, and planned to celebrate over pizza with his family. His lawyer, Melissa O'Connell, said he will be entitled to more than $750,000 in state compensation for the wrongful conviction. Although the amount was high enough for him to re-enter society and start afresh, O'Connell said it could not make up for the years of freedom that he lost. Davis went on to sue the state for damages covering the period from May 21, 2002 to February 13, 2020 for a whopping $18 million. The lawsuit names El Dorado County as well as former detectives Richard Strasser, Rick Fitzgerald, Bill Wilson, who's deceased and being sued through his estate, and Larry Hennick. Sheriff's Office pathologist Dr. Robert Anthony has also been included in the complaint. The Village Life newspaper reported that Davis was homeless after being released. The lawsuit is still pending as of